Oh, I fucked that up for both of us. Didn't I?
We're too busy doing it live over there.
We'll do it
We'll do
live.
it live. Well, we are live. Welcome to
We are
Movie
live.
Boners, everybody.
Hello.
I am so excited for this episode. I'm ecstatic. I've been ecstatic for several months, actually.
Yes.
But before we get too deep in it, what beer are you drinking today?
Okay. I was like, you better fucking find a relevant beer for this episode. Obviously going towards beers named after like breaking your brain or mind is the obvious way. And I had like 3 beers in hand. But then I found this one and I was like, it's kind of a stretch, but I think it works.
Okay.
Which kind of goes hand in hand with, I'm sure, how our guy was feeling when he made this movie.
Yeah.
So I'm drinking Entropic, which made me laugh because it kind of looks like entropy.
Yeah. That's very, very, very close. I like that.
So it's not bad. It's an IPA. I don't know from where. Oh, Equal Parts Brewing. No clue where that is. Not bad. Not bad.
Good. That's good. I have also relatively relevant beer on a couple of levels. The first is I got it and I actually misunderstood it because I got it because I thought that the name was why I got it. But then I learned that the text on the box was not the name of the beer. It was just something they put on there as like a slogan or something. So when I say the name, you're going to say it doesn't make sense at all, and you would be right. It's from the Lagunitas Brewing Company in California somewhere called A Little Something Something. And it has a little dog and it says a little something something. But
All right.
down here in the bottom, it says an indescribable imbibable. And I thought that this was an indescribable movie, and that's why I got it. And then I realized later I misunderstood how this was labeled.
I kind of like the little text that tricked you. I kind of like that as the name more.
It sounded like a beer name, the indescribable imbibable.
It really does.
Not a little something something, but whatever. It's good though. It's a smooth and silky wheat IPA.
All right.
Yeah, it's very good.
All right.
So let's check in on our movie draft.
Yes.
We're here.
Because this has been a weird couple weeks for me. I would
say so.
But like a really good one for you.
Yeah, it's interesting on a few levels. Headline, you're still in the lead.
Yeah.
But the interesting things happened over the course of the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Cocaine Bear is doing well, relatively well, more than you would have expected, probably.
So much better than I would have expected.
Creed 3 is apparently great. I think possibly the best of the series is what I've been seeing.
That's what I heard.
The Creed series, not the Rocky series. So that's interesting. And then today, the day we're recording it, 3 movies came out. 65, the Space Dinosaur one, Scream 6, and Inside, the Willem Dafoe burglar trapped in a weird house movie, which I'm excited about all 3 of those. I will watch all 3 of those for sure.
Yeah.
Scream 6 is very good, apparently.
Holy crap.
7.6 on IMDb at the moment.
Oh my God.
Audience rating of 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. So yeah, that's good.
Wow.
Inside is at a 6.6. They have a tomato meter critic rating, but do not yet have a audience rating. So your average is drugged down a little bit for the moment. I'm sure they'll get that.
I'm kind of confused on Inside to the point where I'm worried that it's like not a real movie all of a sudden. And I'm hoping I'm wrong.
Yeah. It seems very real. But,
right?
Yeah, it could be anything.
But there's like...
On the subject of... Well, you finish your thought.
I was gonna say there's zero advertising for it. There's like nothing, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of worried about that pick.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see what happens with that. It may be like no money because they didn't actually advertise it, but
Yeah,
it might be a good movie, and I'm excited to at least see it.
I still want to
Uh,
see it very much.
but
Yeah.
on the topic of movies that you didn't know for sure were real or not, this last week we got a couple of interesting trailers.
Yep.
With the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie came out. The trailer did. Mutant Mayhem, the Seth Rogen one. Looks pretty cool. The
It
art
looks
looks
fun
cool.
as hell, and I really like the animation style.
Yeah,
Really
me
like
too.
that style.
And I'm pretty excited that Jackie Chan is Splinter.
Hell yes.
That's awesome. I'm a little hesitant on the April casting because I am a child of the 90s where April was a crush of mine. And so to make her just a different sort of an individual than what I'm used to, it's questionable. But we'll see how it goes. And then the other one was I don't even remember what it was called, the Jennifer Lawrence
Oh, I just saw a
R-rated
preview for
comedy.
that where she like gets hired to date some dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an R-rated comedy. I don't remember what it's called, but it's in the list somewhere. I didn't even remember. I think I drafted it, but I don't remember
I
for
don't
sure.
remember. I saw the preview and it was like, oh, when is she? Like, she's coming back?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that must have been one that Jake and I just never even thought of. And I can't
I know
remember
it
what it's
was
called
on
either.
there because I remember trying to put the poster on there, but it didn't even have a poster at the time.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't remember what it's called. There's a bunch of weird movies on here. I don't remember what they're called. So yeah, that's where we're at. Shazam comes out next week.
Yep.
John Wick comes out in 2 weeks. So I think that the competition is in full effect.
Yes, I would say so.
It's gonna be back and forth here for a little bit.
I kind of feel like you're going to have a good moment of victory, or like,
I like the sound of
I
that.
wouldn't say victory, maybe for a month or so.
Takes it back.
I think you're about to give me a really good run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed that I have a lot of movies in March.
Yeah.
So starting with Creed and 65 now, but I also have all of these movies in March and then a lot of movies in April as well.
Yeah.
You have a lot of May, and then we both are pretty even through the summer. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I think with John Wick coming out, I think that is going to be huge. They were already projecting it to have just stupid amounts of like pre-sales and opening weekend. I was like, I'm so stoked, but mad at the same time that I did not draft that out of spite to Jake.
Yeah, I would have been pretty sad if you got both Mission Impossible and John Wick. That would have crushed me. All right. I think that's all we have there. What new things have you seen recently?
I only watched one new thing recently.
That's good.
Yeah.
You need a break. The last couple episodes, you've had like 10 new things.
Fair enough. I saw Cocaine Bear.
How was it?
I fucking love that movie. It's one of the funniest movies I've seen for a while.
Good.
It's so good. And it made me so confused and happy and a little upset because I knew you had it in your draft. And when I realized just how awesome it is, I was like, shit.
Yeah. That's exciting, though. It's been a long time, I feel like, since there was a really funny comedy out.
It was so good. It's so ridiculous. The more the movie goes on, the more things happen in it. Mm-hmm. You just find yourself to a point where you can't stop laughing because of the absurdity that the movie is.
Good.
And I loved every moment of it.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see it. That sounds great. I watched the opposite of that. I watched The Whale finally, which was very sad. Very good. I will say very good. Brendan Fraser was great. Just hearing his voice again on film, I was like, I missed this so much.
As he makes
But
you weep because
yeah, it's obviously it's a very super simple story and very dramatic, very emotional. So I wouldn't say I'm the target audience for it, but it was good, certainly good. Christy really liked it. She was talking about it for days after. She really did not like the next movie. I also kind of didn't like it, and I think you said that you did. So we saw Knock at the Cabin as
okay,
well. It was. I'm not sure I liked it. I certainly liked it a lot less than Old, and I think that there's just. I don't think the presentation did a good job of like keeping me on the fence as like if the apocalypse was real or not.
right,
It was just kind of awkwardly, oh, it's certainly not real. Oh, it certainly is real. Oh, it's certainly, and it just was, I guess, too abrupt or didn't leave as much questions as I would have liked.
okay,
I would have, I think, benefited from more vagueness in the
yeah.
actual on either side of the argument. Let
Did you
people
at
decide.
least agree that Dave Bautista is like the best part of the whole movie?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, 100%.
That was like, even though I enjoyed it more than I like enjoyed Old,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, Dave Bautista is
Yeah,
like,
yeah, he's great.
he's
He's
great in
super
that
great.
movie.
And then last thing I saw based on your recommendation last episode, I watched Vengeance,
Oh yeah,
which was also great.
yes. I'm
That
so
was
happy
like,
you liked that movie.
oh, I loved it. And Chrissy loved it too. She was like, wow, that was a great movie. And I was like, yeah, it was. Dustin was right again, I guess.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Vengeance was, it was just really interesting and fun. And I like how it didn't pick on any particular side. It kind of picked on everybody as far as like just a human thing and
Yeah,
even like East Coast elites and Bible Belt Southerners
West
and all that
Texas
stuff.
people.
Texans. Yeah. I was like, it all just kind of they all worked well together and I think it
Yeah,
came together in a great way. I loved it.
yeah. I loved Vengeance. Loved it. And Ashton Kutcher's first scene, like
Mm-hmm.
his bit of dialogue, how he like perceives stuff and explains some stuff, I found myself being like, am I being inspired by Ashton Kutcher? Like, is he making
Yeah.
me feel warm right now? This is weird. Huh.
Yeah. I liked his whole character and his whole character arc. It was very interesting.
I'm so happy you liked Vengeance. I love that movie so
Yeah.
much.
I'm excited to watch it again. It was really good.
Is that it?
Speaking of watching movies again and again
And again and again and again and again.
we're going to talk about Tenet, the Christopher Nolan film, which you may or may not have seen because it came out in 2020 during the pandemic. 2020.
2020.
It's one of the, I think it was the last movie I saw in theaters until they like closed.
No, they
Or
were already closed.
I saw it and they like attempted to reopen and then closed again or something. I saw it in the theater when it came out.
Yeah, you and I saw it in the theater.
Oh, did we?
God damn it.
There's your answer. I don't remember you being there.
Oh my God. How do you not remember that?
Because I was thinking about all of the things that the movie makes me
Christy,
think of.
And myself stood outside the theater at the end of the movie, just like, what the fuck did we just watch? And then we had
Didn't that guy come by? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I remember. There was a guy that talked to us and he was like, what the fuck was that? And we were like, I know. And then we were like, yeah, we should tell him we have a movie podcast. And we're like, no, we don't want to be dorks.
But we are. And proud of it. Yeah, no, Tenet had that weird release where theaters were shut down and they tried doing like a couple small test releases and they picked like a couple small movies. They did a David Copperfield movie, if I remember right.
Okay.
With that kid from Slumdog Millionaire. And there was like one or two others, but then Tenet was supposed to be the big one to test how much of an audience would return to the theater to see a movie. But at the time they released it, the media was still telling everyone like, oh, if you go outside, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Don't want to sit in a room for 2.5 hours with other people breathing on you.
right. So it was set up to fail by the studios, and then the studio came out and was like, it was a flop. And then the theater stayed shut down for a while after that
Yeah.
until they started slowly opening back up. But it was like months because Tenet came out in like July or August.
Yeah, it was a summer blockbuster kind of
Yeah.
situation.
But Tenet is also the last movie that Christopher Nolan made with Warner Brothers.
Mm.
Because at that time, Warner Brothers was deciding to do their direct-to-stream service.
Mm-hmm.
And Nolan was very adamantly against that and still is, because it takes away the experience of going to a theater and watching movies that are made for a theater experience. He felt it was taking away the artist's intention.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with him. Although convenience is nice, but I have to agree, like, go to the theater, folks.
Mm-hmm.
It's there for a reason. Go enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Tenet's got like weird stuff around it.
Mm-hmm.
And then
and I think people formed opinions about it based on that.
Yeah.
Oh, it didn't do great, or it was confusing or not worth your time or whatever. I was going to say,
definitely worth your time.
Yeah. Yeah, depending on how much time
we should
on it
preface like we always do, but heavy spoilers.
Yeah, so the whole episode's about Tenet. We're going to get deep into it, spoil the shit out of it. This episode was brought up by a listener and friend and fan of ours who's been on board since the beginning, which I think is cool. I don't know necessarily that we've had any other episodes yet that have been suggested by listeners other than my wife.
Yeah.
Have we?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't remember seeing the movie with you. I don't remember what episodes we've done.
Your brain has failed you. We did, but the other suggestions we did were movies neither of us had watched yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
so this one was...
what was it? Mulholland Drive?
Oh, fucking Mulholland Drive.
Fucking Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, if you want to suggest movies to torture us with, you could do that as well. But otherwise, we like watching good movies. If you want to hear our whole episode about Mulholland Drive, feel free. But yes, it's appropriate, I think, that this episode comes after last episode, which is about revisiting movies that we thought weren't good. That was where this fan brought up this movie. Is like, I actually think this movie is a piece of shit, but maybe you can tell me or convince me otherwise. And so hopefully we will, because I think it's a very good movie. I thought it was a good movie, and I thought it was really interesting when I had first seen it. After watching it 4 more times in the last 2 weeks, I think it's a great movie. And I think it's all of the details, and Christopher Nolan does this thing where he fills in plot holes that you weren't even looking for. And the more you watch it, the more you pick up on the little, when he says that, he means this, and that actually affects that later on. It doesn't matter as far as like how quickly the movie is flowing, but if you actually are paying really close attention, there's a lot more to it that it actually all held together super well.
Yeah.
So it holds up. It's great.
I also have a very strong opinion. And I was actually talking to a guy at my work today about it, because he's always asking me. He's one of my regular guys that comes in, and he was like, "So what's your next episode?" And I told him, "Oh, we're going to deep dive into Tenet, like talk all about what went into making it, the movie itself." And he was like, "Damn." I was like, "Yeah," and it got us talking about the practical effects that Christopher Nolan is known for utilizing, and just adamantly like, this is how I make a movie.
Yeah.
And him and I agreed, and he kind of mentioned this too, of like, whether you're a fan of the movie itself, because it's a spy thriller at its core. It's a spy thriller. So if you're not into spy movies, especially kind of Bond-esque,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're not going to be drawn to the story. However, I think Tenet, if you're a film fan, a fan of movies in general, just Tenet as a production, you should be praising this movie
Yeah.
because they did shit practically and they completely redid how Hollywood films movies, especially in terms of IMAX cameras. It is
Mm-hmm.
unreal what they did just on a filmmaking scale. And I
Yeah.
feel the movie deserves all credit just on that. Whether you like the story or not, it deserves your respect because
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure James Cameron watched Tenet going, what? You can actually film a whole scene that's going forward and reverse at the same time, and they did it with editing tricks and practical, like they're driving? What?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty simple. You just have them fight backwards and walk backwards and talk
And talk
backwards.
backwards. Yeah, I realized the more that I've watched this movie over the past couple of years, and especially prepping for this, I was like, fuck. I think Tenet should just be shown in every film school. I think every filmmaker should look at it, not
Mm-hmm.
to copy it, but just take note of how much bigger of an impact on a story your
Mm-hmm.
practical effects when you make your audience actually a part of the story, like how much
Yeah.
more meaningful that is.
Right. Yeah. And you feel how real it is by
Yeah.
watching it. Like you can tell, oh, they're in real places, they're in real cities, they're on all these, because it's a spy thriller, they go to all these different countries around the world and make it a global problem that they're trying to stop.
Right.
And it makes you feel very much like they're in all those places because they are. And it Christopher Nolan has done so many interesting things with practical effects, and I love him for that. I've read an interesting thing recently where in Interstellar he planted all of that corn.
Yeah.
Because Zack Snyder planted all the corn in Man of Steel, and you can just tell the difference between the corn in Man of Steel and the corn in Justice League, which is CG, the difference. And it's a huge pain in the ass. And they said, you're not going to be successful at it. And you're growing it in a place that it shouldn't grow because you want the mountains in the background and all this stuff. But he did it and it looks great. And then all the stuff that they didn't drive a car through, he actually sold for a profit. So it works out. But it's just that dedication to plant corn, wait however long it takes corn to grow, and then
we're going to film the scene. Yeah. I obviously, for people that have been listening to our show since the start, Jake and I, we kind of worship this guy. Maybe that's extreme.
I would say he's my favorite filmmaker for a lot of different reasons.
He has such a different eye when it comes to filmmaking. And what's so funny is I've watched a handful of interviews with like actors that have worked with him on previous projects, and then just the making of documentary of Tenet, which go watch it. It's incredible. And just kind of getting a feel for Nolan himself. You know, I've got the Nolan Variations. It's the book all about Christopher Nolan and how he approaches making films and stuff, and on various sets. Everyone comes or has this like, I guess, picture of him as being this almighty filmmaker. He is this genius, this like lord of movies, right? And some of the interviews I watched about him, the actors were like, yeah, he's a genius because he's so real. He's so just like on the spot. I saw a thing with Michael J. White, and they were talking to him about The Dark Knight and working with Nolan and working with Ledger and all that. And they were like, so what was it like working with the genius that is Christopher Nolan? And he was like, I was reading the script and asking him questions about my character and what he wanted me to do. And I guess Christopher Nolan's responses were typically like, oh, I didn't even think of that. What's your opinion? What do you think we should do? And like, Not just
Yeah.
on that, he's done that with like every film he's on, where he knows what he needs, but he wants his actors to be more in the moment and
And
just
involved in the movie making process.
yeah. And it's crazy. He's got his music composers are on set during the shoot. They don't just wait for the final print. They actually like will kind of help write the score as they're filming the scenes during all the different takes. He encourages them to go and talk to the actors to get a feel for their characters, talk to just set designers, get a feel for what the like cinematography is going to be. It's crazy the amount of energy and attention he puts into every aspect of making a movie.
Yeah. And what I see a lot is that he just loves it.
He just loves it.
He's having the best time, and he just creates these movies that they all are incredible. Every single one is an A+ movie. They all blow my mind. I love it because it puts me back as like being a child and seeing a movie and being like, I didn't know that was possible to do that in a movie. And he's still doing that. And I'm almost 36 years old. Like,
Right.
he's still blowing my mind. I was like, I didn't know you could do that in a movie. And it's so cool that you found a way to do that.
Right. And his whole approach is just like, I know what I kind of had in mind for this, and let's see what we can do to make it reality. And the crews and everyone that's going to make the movie, they all have their like, Christopher Nolan hands you a script, and you're immediately like, how the fuck are we going to pull this off? And especially with Tenet, everyone from stunt coordinator to like costume designer, everyone had the thought of just, what? We're going to do what?
Yeah. I watched a YouTube clip of him a little while ago talking about describing Memento and how he like planned it out. And if you don't know, Memento is a movie where it's one of his first movies, probably the one that was like this big break. But it's told essentially kind of in backwards, like the guy has short-term memory. So it's going forward for a little bit, and then he loses memory and it kind of goes back, and then it goes forward a little bit and then it goes back. And so it's very kind of similar to Tenet, where time is inverted at times. But seeing him trying to put it on a whiteboard or a chalkboard, and he's like, I've actually never thought of it in a diagram. I only think about it in writing. So he's trying to figure out how to describe it. And the way he like draws out the timeline and then cuts in between them is very interesting. And then it made me think a lot about Tenet. I was like, how do you even describe Tenet to people? Be like, we're going to make a movie. It's going to be half of it going forward. Some of the people will go backward in time. Then they'll get there. They'll all go backward in time, and some will go forward. And like, then they'll fight each other. One person going backward, one person going forward. And then we'll blow up a plane, a real plane.
In a real hangar at a real airport.
It blows my mind, the things that they can do.
We're gonna have a car chase, but with inverted time and lateral time, or like forward moving time. At the same time. Yeah. Oh, and we're gonna crash one of the cars and flip it in the middle of all of this. Is that all? No. Then later we're gonna blow up a building like 4 times, same building, but we're gonna like change where the explosion comes from.
Because they blow it up in different timelines and they all converge.
How are we doing that? We're gonna build it, blow it up from like miniatures, and it's all practical. What green screen are we using? None. That's a fact, kids. There is zero green screen in Tenet.
It's so funny to me if you watch like the behind the scenes footage of like with what just like vignettes or whatever of like, here's what it was like on shooting Tenet and all this stuff. It's the exact same as the footage from the movie. It's just from a different angle with a worse camera. But it's the behind the scenes is literally just the same thing as the movie.
It's true. It's very true.
So all that said,
let's
actually get into spoiling Tenet front to back, top to bottom, inside and out. All the directions you can think of, because there's a lot of them.
We're going to try our best. Let's be real. We're going to try our very best to it's not going to work. Just bear with us, guys.
Yeah, I mean, we are not experts by any means, although I have seen the movie, I think, 6 times now, 4 in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I would say I feel like I understand the story and the movie 100%. I understand the characters and the motivations about 90-95%. I understand the science of the film about 60%, maybe.
Hey,
That's
I
being
think that's
generous.
probably better than what they originally intended. Nolan even was very upfront saying, I didn't care for it to be scientifically accurate.
Yeah.
Ironically, then you get scientists that came out and were like, he kind of got a lot of the science correct without wanting to get the science correct. And
Yeah.
you're like, God damn it, Nolan.
The script was reviewed by Kip Thorne, who's like a physicist. He's the same guy that worked with him on Interstellar. And Interstellar is famously praised for being, oh, we never thought of, scientists tell him, we have never thought of black holes in that way. I can't believe your film helped us actually understand
And
black
then at
holes.
the same time, they're like, this might be one of the most scientifically accurate films ever put on film.
Yeah. So that's good. It's just, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
So let's blow your mind. Do you want to start at the beginning? That's a good place.
I mean, you
to
kind of
start,
have
I think.
to. I love the beginning. I love the whole movie.
I do love the whole movie. I will say it's not a perfect movie by any means.
No.
But I think that that's to be expected with a movie of this scale and complexity.
Mhm.
It is much easier to make something perfect when it is small and simple. And the more components and factors and things you throw into it, you just increase the odds of it having
But
difficulty. But I think for what it sets out to be, it is the most perfect version of that.
It's I was thinking about this, I think the third time I watched it this last week. When we first went and saw it in the theater, and we were like trying to get our brains from oozing out of our ear holes any more than they already did for 2.5 hours. I remember looking at you. You won't remember this, apparently.
It's coming back to me. I remember the guy on the street.
But I remember telling you, I have a feeling that the basic story, like just what the story is, or the movie is actually about, it's like, I bet it's actually very simple, but it just seems so overly complicated just with all of the time stuff.
Yeah.
It's not even really, well, I mean, there is time travel, but it's not exactly time travel. Anyways.
Yeah, but I see what you're saying. And I do agree. I think that part of the reason it's confusing is because you are entering this world through the eyes of the protagonist, who is learning all of these things as it goes. When he's told various things, he accepts it very quickly.
Right.
And there are a lot of times I'm like, I don't know what that means to reverse your entropy.
Which is probably why the protagonist like just accepts it, because his brain is probably like,
he's just like smiles and nods. Just smile and nod and fake it till you make it, and it works out for him.
So
but through the course of the movie, what is happening, or what is actually happening, and he learns what he thought is happening is not happening. That happens like 3 different times where he's like, I thought this was happening, it's not happening, it's actually this. So if you're not keeping up or catching those changes, you can get lost pretty fast.
Having watched it several times now since we saw it in the theater, I'm gonna kind of like humble brag. I think I was, for the most part, correct. It's a spy thriller. It is.
Yeah.
You can tell there is so much influence from like the Bond franchise and other spy films. You can see that genre's like past films, that influence in this movie. I started laughing the last time I watched it yesterday. It was like halfway through the movie. It was like the second scene after you meet Sator. Yeah. And I kind of giggled. And I was like, oh my God. That was when I was like, I think I was somewhat correct. I'm like, this is a Bond film. Like,
Mhm.
this is very basic. Villain has this like
Elaborate
vendetta
plot.
against the world that is so absurd
Mhm.
and crazy.
Mhm.
Obviously, it can't happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And you get the spy who is just trying to infiltrate, figure out. He doesn't even necessarily care about all of the details. To me, I'm like, he's really just
Yeah.
figuring, how do I stop this guy? Like,
Right. It's not his job to figure out all
right.
that. It's just he was given a mission and he needs
And I
to
had to
stop
laugh
the
when I
bad guy.
realized that and kind of had that like understanding because it made the whole rest of the movie where I was just like, I think I am at a place where I can watch Tenet and not be so where my brain is like, I'm not going to break
Mhm.
this time. Because when you simplify it, where you're like, the protagonist, although he has to know details,
Yeah.
they are not what actually get him to what he needs to do. His whole
Mhm.
goal is stop Seder.
Yeah.
The whole goal.
Mhm. Yeah, and he learns different things along the way, and he's like, and they're like, well, what he's doing might end the world or it might not. And he's like, and he thinks about it. And he's like, well, that's interesting, but it doesn't matter because I just have to stop him
Because I gotta
regardless.
stop him. And it's almost
Mhm.
like when the protagonist has an understanding of the details are around me, I can utilize
Mhm.
some if I have to, or when I have to, I should say.
Mhm.
But everybody else around him, they are the ones who have to worry about the details. Their mission
Mhm.
is all the details, all of the
Mhm.
inverted objects and time
Mhm.
travel. His sole mission is very simple:
Mhm.
stop the bad guy.
Yeah, which I love. It's jumping ahead, but at the very end, Seder tells him, "You don't actually even know what you're fighting against. You're a fanatic who just believes what they
Right.
tell you." And I think it's so fascinating. But I agree with you. I do think there is a simple story at the heart of it, and it's just told in a complicated
It's just
way,
told in a complicated way. It's a
which
lot
Nolan is
of
famous
icing on
for.
the cake, but it's the
Mhm.
best kind of icing
Yeah,
where it's not complete showmanship or like,
yeah.
like glitzy
It's
crap.
like
It's
it's like saying that Inception is a heist film. It
right.
is,
It is.
but it's also a lot of other
But there's
shit on
so
top of
much
that.
more to I love Inception. Oh my god.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to do this about a bunch of different Abyss movies. Um, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very simple. However, I really like the complicated parts of it,
Mhm.
and that's most of why I like it. I think that it's if you approach it as an ordinary film, you may like it if you can find the things that you like in ordinary films, or you may hate it.
Yeah.
I think it's not exactly like ordinary films. I think it's more like if you like riddles or brain teasers or puzzles as a form of entertainment, then you'll probably like Tenet because it is a lot of, oh, I think I understand how this works and how the entropy works and who these people are. And then after you see the film, you'll find yourself doing the dishes or in the shower and be like, wait, if he was there, then that means that this guy was there. Like you just start putting it together and starting to fully form this
Yeah.
thing that is that kind of fun. And if you don't find that fun, you might hate the movie.
If you don't want your brain completely just eradicated essentially,
Yeah.
you're probably
And if
not
you
going to like
get
Tenet.
deep enough into it, you'll discover a couple of different paradoxes and you just have to accept it or reject it
Which
entirely.
I think is so brilliant because they even bring up paradoxes, and we're jumping ahead again.
Mhm.
Sorry, guys. It doesn't matter when you talk about Tenet.
It's true. We're always talking about it in the right time
Right.
because we can always go back.
They actually bring up paradoxes, and they do it in the form of the
Mhm.
grandfather paradox. And I
Mhm.
love the protagonist flat out says, like, well, what's the answer? There is no answer. Go get some sleep.
Yeah, it's a paradox, dude.
I love that scene so much because it's such a great way of kind of rejuvenating the idea of like, how do we fill this plot point? Oh, clever dialogue, which we joke about a lot on our show. Nolan comes in with that same rule and just does it in a way that like you're not allowed to argue it because he just told you it's a paradox. Get over it.
Yeah. And it's to be enjoyed as a film. And he does a great job of like telling you the things you need to know or showing you the things you need to know, and then skipping over a lot of the stuff you don't.
Right.
And you can for the most part ignore it, or for the most part you can figure it out for yourself on your own time, because he puts a lot in there, but a lot of it also doesn't really matter. It's because the story is what the story is.
But let's get into the opening scene, which I gotta say, it is one of the most intriguing and just like exhilarating opening sequences because it's so abrupt. And one thing that I think blows me away about Tenet, and I remember we were all joking about it the first time we saw it, and the more I watch it, the more I'm like, I would not want to watch this movie any other way, is the sound. It is so loud, and it is so like, I mean, it's deafening from the opening scene.
Yeah. And I love how it builds with the orchestra tuning up, and how that sound of the orchestra tuning up is very chaotic. There's no actual like flow of notes or melody. And then as soon as they stop and they're about to start, and you're waiting for all of that chaos to come together into a flowing, beautiful thing, it's interrupted by more chaos.
Right.
Of the
Suddenly you get
running
like
in
and shooting the place up. It's instantly just like, oh shit, what the fuck is that? Like, you feel like you are actually in the concert hall with that wide audience and trying to figure out like, what do I do? I can't run. I'm stuck in my chair. Oh my God. Oh my God. What I love so much about that for the rest of the film, actually, and his other movies, is his sound design. And we don't ever talk about sound design on this.
It's true.
But I feel it needs to be brought up now, especially with this movie. The sound design is so real. It's so effective because it never sounds like cleaned up, polished Hollywood sounds. Everything is very real world. So, you know, you get the gunshots echoing in the music hall, you know, the orchestra, like you were saying, their warm-up sounds. When I was watching it again this week, I was like, man, I don't feel like, normally you'll see a movie that has like an orchestra or whatever, and they'll try to have those sounds, but you can tell it's so toned down, it's so tamed down, because they're like, well, we have to have quiet for this dialogue, or we have to have like separation from the sound. Nolan is like, no, we're just gonna do it.
Put it all up to 11.
Put it, and it was so effective to me. And I remember being in the theater when we saw it and just being like, having moments during the movie of going, I think I might be going deaf, because like the sound of the boat flying through the water is so deafening, or the gunshots or the explosions are just so deafening. But the more I watch it, the more I'm like, this was perfect. The sound is so perfect, and it's so immersing.
Yeah.
And you get all of that in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. And I've had that a couple of times, not just with Tenet, but Interstellar, Dark Knight Rises.
Dark Knight Rises was a huge one, yeah.
Yeah, and they're all, Nolan's been getting criticized for his last few movies because of the sound design, and because either the dialogue's hard to understand, or at least for some people. And something to know about that is that he mixes his movies for very good theaters, because he wants you to see it in IMAX or in a very good, he wants you to have the best experience possible.
Right.
Most people will mix their movies for average or lowest common denominator theaters. And so I've gone into a theater and seen a notice that the theater has posted that says, the sound is not wrong. The sound is not too loud. The sound is how the filmmaker asked us to play it for you. And, and so that might be pretentious to some people, or it might not be what they want. Or you may experience a different experience when you get it on home video, because they often remix it for the sound design for home video, or if you're using headphones or whatever, it just sounds different. But I do think the most of the criticism in Tenet comes from not being able to hear people's voices. Granted, they are wearing masks a lot of the time, and some of them have accents, and they use big words that I've never heard before, like detritus. But for the most part, when I saw it the first time in the theater, I was like, I don't know what people are complaining about. I maybe missed a couple of words or sentences, but you get the gist. It doesn't actually matter that much.
Right. But yeah, so we get that opening. Chaos erupts in the music hall. You've got the spy team who's like getting dressed in the back of a van. It's in the Ukraine. And they get like their signal, their cue to go in. They're going to go and try and get, he's not a like mole, but he's the person of interest.
Some spy or somebody who made contact with somebody else, and they just need to extract him or kill him. I love how Christopher Nolan shows you things more than tells you them, because it's so simple. But when they're waiting around in that van, and then all of the other cops show up because this gunfight has erupted in this music hall, and you see like the logo on the side of the van, and then you see all of the different patches of logos on the center console, and they choose the one that matches, hands them to the guys, they put them on their shoulder, and you're like, oh, these guys are not with them. They are infiltrating, pretending to be them. And it works and flows so well. And you're like, I get it. Nobody said anything, but I understand.
But I understand exactly what's happening. They are the extraction team. They're the spy team. They're going in. They're like, there's something important happening in the music hall.
Yeah. And using the police and whatever as cover for it.
You get in the music hall. It's a very fast pace. There's a ton of running. It's tiring. It is physically tiring just watching the movie. I can't imagine what it was like when they were filming, where it's like, I'm running in full gear. I'm an actor. I'm not conditioned for this. I'm running full gear up and down these huge staircases in this huge main hall, dodging gunfire and getting in fights. And I'm rappelling down a window.
And probably doing it more than once, because you didn't get it on your first take.
Right. And like, oh yeah, we're going to do it at least 15 takes.
We haven't talked about it yet, but John David Washington as the star of the movie, as the protagonist, that's one of the things I was the most impressed with him.
100%.
His physicality is like, the way that he runs with complete abandon is like on the level with Tom Cruise. Like he just throws himself into running. He throws himself into taking punches, giving punches. His physicality is incredible. And so I had not seen him in much of anything before this. I'd seen him in Ballers. And I didn't even know he was Denzel Washington's son. I was like, and then I found out like very recently, within the last like year, that he was Denzel. I was like, no way.
And then you watch Tenet and you're like, Denzel does that. Yeah, he's Denzel's son.
There's one scene. There's one scene where he's on the boat with Sater, and he has just saved him from going overboard, and they're having the conversation. And Sater leaves, and John David Washington gets up and turns around and walks away. The way he reaches back and adjusts his belt as he's walking, I'm like, that's a Denzel thing. I don't know why, but it is exactly a Denzel
like
thing.
Father, like son. Yes.
Yeah. Every time, that's all I think of now. But yeah, him going in and grabbing that guy, they're giving code words. Like, it's the way that it just flows is so exciting. And definitely reminds me of just a spy thriller the whole time.
One of my favorite details during that opening sequence, and it's something that like I don't think I've ever seen quite to this degree is when they're running through the audience and there's still gunfire coming at them, and the person of interest or whatever,
Yeah.
the target, he sits in an empty seat and has to play dead. Now, we've seen people play dead in other movies to avoid, getting shot or executed.
Sure.
His seems so much more intense because as he's sitting there, I mean, like this, you see like a bullet hit the chair that he's sitting on. You can hear it shooting, and he has to stay. Just stay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he like tries to leave, and the protagonist is like, no, stay there.
Right.
Yeah.
You get a lot of gunfire. It's not hard to keep up with what's happening. You know instantly like something's wrong because he runs into a guy he thinks is part of the crew who's not. But they do something kind of shocking. No one chose to show you immediately a pretty big hint. Well, not even a hint, just telling you flat out like you're going to see some crazy shit when the protagonist is on the staircase looking at the bomb, and he's like down, he's got a guy with a gun to his head, and he watches the hole in the step or in the back of the chair like invert.
Yeah. There's a bullet hole that comes back together and heals itself. And then he turns around and the guy behind him gets shot like the bullet came out of the hole into him. And then a strange man runs away with a little red.
Yeah, he's got a backpack that's got like this weird little red string. It's almost like that was foreshadowing.
Yeah. And yeah, you're like, that I should pay attention
right.
to. Because,
but Nolan never shies away from making sure like, oh, I need to retain that right there. Because he does it in all of his movies where it'll be a close-up of like, he basically might as well flash. Pay attention, pay attention.
Hey, dummy. Look at this thing.
Ding, 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 ding.
I appreciate because I need that sometimes. There's a lot of like, he does that where it's like the focus will shift and you'll like your eyes will be drawn to it. Or there's a time in a minute where John David Washington makes like a motion with his hands while he's holding a gun, and the camera like slowly pans down where it like cuts off his head. And if you're looking at his face, you're like, what the fuck is going on? But then you realize, oh, he's trying to show me what he's doing with his hands down here because he's doing a gesture.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But that whole scene where he's like trying to save the guy and they extract him, and there's so much going on. It's so hard to keep track of what's going on, but they drop these like bombs, like the cops are dropping bombs.
Yeah.
And you're like, what is happening? And you realize that they are trying to kill this asset. Like the police are trying to kill the asset, not just
that's the word that kept eluding
me.
me.
Not just the like terrorist dudes that ran in, but the police that are also trying to kill them. And so they're using it as like a cover for just a big disturbance. And then this is like that guy they actually want to kill. And so they're putting all these bombs down. The protagonist comes in and he's like, I don't need to save all these people, but I'm still going to save them. And he runs back into the burning building basically and collects them all very quickly, which is awesome. And then throws them out and they all run outside. And then they get in the van and there's strange people in the van that you're like, and he doesn't know who they are and you don't know who they are. And then you realize that he's being taken captive because his team isn't there. It's just all
you
very
find out
confusing very fast.
Pretty quick. Like he hops in the van and he's like, what the hell's going on? And immediately you're like, oh shit, the plan backfired. Like something's wrong. Someone else infiltrated this whole thing. And then you get potentially one of the darkest moments in a Christopher Nolan movie. Like, damn.
Yeah, every time I watch it, it kind of throws me off guard a little bit because the rest of the movie is pretty standard PG-13 rated. But this like scene, it's like so intense where he's being tortured by this Russian guy. He's having his teeth pulled out one by one, and he's being told to like give up his team, and he's refusing to do it. And then he dives forward and takes that
You
pill.
watch him take a cyanide pill and like convulse and die.
Yeah, and his like eye goes bloodshot, and then it goes Tenet, and you're like, what the fuck am I about
Well,
to
and
watch?
even besides the torture aspect of that scene, the way it was shot and just there's like a weird lighting and graininess that switches. You go from like a very clean look, and then it's gross and dirty. He dies, and you get title, and then it's polished and clean for like the rest of the movie. So that one blip is just so like off-putting, if you will.
And it's stressful because you're in a train yard. There's trains going back and forth. You don't know if another one's like going to come down the middle and hit him. The camera will like pan out to the side, and you're on the other side of the train watching through the train as this guy's like reaching in and grabbing his mouth with pliers and stuff. It's shot great, but it is very effective in the way that it's like stresses you out.
Did you notice? Oh, I'm going to hold off on my question until we get to a scene a little while later. But Nolan did something really interesting in this movie. Well, he kind of replicated something that he previously did in Dunkirk, and I'm wondering if you caught it. I'll ask when we get to the specific scene later on, but I'm curious to know if you caught it.
Yeah, please do. I have a theory about the cyanide capsule that we'll get back to later on, because they like show it and the guy shows it in his mouth. So you know exactly what it looks like, the CIA issue cyanide capsule. And then in the very next scene, post title card, he's in a bed. The guy's like, welcome to the afterlife. And he tells him, as you're like, oh, maybe it was not real that this guy was ripping out his teeth. No, he tells him, yeah, we rebuilt your mouth. You've been in a coma for a while.
Right. He tells you, like, you've been in an induced coma for, I don't even think he tells him the time period, actually.
No.
I think it just says, like, you've been in a coma. So you, as the viewer, you're like, you're right at the same page as the protagonist going, well, how long has it been?
Yeah.
Like,
and it's like, what? You rebuilt my mouth? That doesn't sound fun.
That's gotta take some time. What the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I love that he goes through all that. He's on the boat with the guy, and then the guy's like, hey, you passed a test, and we realize that you are really you run into the burning building. You are a hero. We need you to help us with this secret mission. And then the protagonist is like, I resign. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want my teeth ripped out anymore.
Nope. Turns out the spy life, not for me.
Yeah, I think I've gone as far as I want to go in the spy life. But he sucks them in and he says, actually, we are trying to stop a plot that will end, like it will save everybody on the planet if you're able to stop it. And so he's like, okay, I'm a little intrigued, and gets sucked back in. And he tells him that he doesn't know much. But he has a word, tenet, and he has a gesture, which is doing this. Put your fingers together. And no, I know. I'm just telling the audience.
Oh, you're telling the people only listening. Yeah, you got to put your hands together.
You put your fingers together and you interlock them like your fingers. It's like time going forward and backward and meeting in the middle and working together.
If you notice, when he does it too, he kind of like stresses it where he like pulls his fingers, and if you do that, your fingers kind of lock. So he's kind of showing him like,
yeah, that's true.
The whole gesture. There's something to the whole thing.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I love all of the spy stuff. I love the code words. I love we live in a twilight world and no friends at dusk. And I love the gestures. I love how I mentioned a second ago. There's a couple times where he shows him and he's like, if you say the word and do the gesture, it'll open all of the right doors and some of the wrong ones. And so he goes to in the middle of the ocean windmill farm to get picked up.
By the way, that's a real windmill farm out in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah. And one of my favorite things about how you know that this character is the protagonist is that every time he's waiting around, he's doing pull-ups because that's what protagonists do. You have to just do pull-ups all the time. But he gets picked up from that, and then he goes to meet this doctor or scientist. I call her a doctor because she's wearing a lab coat, and I'm an idiot. But she's a scientist, and he does that. He's like, just throws Tenet into a sentence casually, and then puts his clipboard under his arm and puts his hands together like this. And if you're not paying attention and noticing, it just looks like a normal thing. But if you are, and you should, you're like, ooh, that's the thing. He's doing the thing, and he's trying to get in, and it works. And then he does
she doesn't even argue or really respond. She sees him make the gesture, say the word Tenet, and she just like casually grabs her badge, walks over to a door, and goes beep.
Yeah, and those are my favorite kinds of things where it means something to the people that are paying attention, and to everybody else, it's just oblivious. Those are the best spycraft things. So I love picking up on that and feeling like I'm in the know while I'm watching it.
What's crazy is like at this point in the movie, we're really only, I don't even know if we are a full half hour into the film at this point.
No, we are 13 minutes into the movie when they meet.
You did a timestamp?
I am currently watching the movie while we talk.
Yes.
And we're at that exact moment.
You are pulling a me.
Yeah. Yeah, so much has happened in the first 13 minutes.
13 minutes. 13 minutes. And you're like, what? You've already seen parts of the world that none of us probably even ever thought existed. We've been shown inversion without realizing that we saw inversion.
We saw a weird thing. Yeah.
We saw a weird thing and a lot of violence. And all of a sudden she like walks him into that room. There's a big shot up block of wall or stone. And she just like, I loved her delivery where you can tell she's been working on this shit for long enough that it doesn't really affect her.
It's ordinary.
It's ordinary to her. And it's such a weird, like, how much of this shit would you have to deal with on a daily basis to be like, just another day at work, not that interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's like, this is just the materials I've been assigned to research or something like that. And you're like, well, this is pretty special dang materials to be like, assigned. This is
kind of crazy shit, lady. Be more excited.
Yeah. But she describes it in a lot of words that I only partly understand. So she tells him to point the gun and shoot at the wall. And he's like, the gun is empty. And she's like, just do it anyway, fuckhead. And he does. And then the gun fires and he opens it and there's a bullet in there. And she describes that this bullet is actually, it's had its entropy reversed, which I don't exactly know what entropy is.
All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
According to the dictionary, you're going to hate this definition.
Okay.
A thermodynamic quantity representing the unavailability of a system's thermal energy for conversion into mechanical work, often interpreted as the degree of disorder or randomness in the system.
Okay.
That's definition one. Definition
Dear dictionary people, I understood less words in that than I understood.
Definition two, lack of order or predictability, gradual decline into disorder.
Okay, so that's what I understood entropy to be, more or less, is that it is the gradual decline of everything. Everything in the world is deteriorating slowly. Yeah. And so what it sounds like to me is if you inverse the entropy of every object or an object, a specific object, then it will go from decay and disorder backwards to order and creation, essentially. And so that was like the most mind-blowing piece originally, first watch, of that time is not just a human construct of like we're all traveling through time because we know what time is, but that objects themselves also are perceiving time their own specific way.
Right.
And an object goes from being created to being destroyed. and it could potentially go from being destroyed to being created, like a bullet, for example. So that's interesting. And she's like, there's this in the future somewhere, they're turning all these things into going backwards. We perceive them as going backwards in time. And she does a great thing, which I think is Nolan talking to the audience, where she's like, don't try to understand it. Just feel it. And she literally says, don't understand it, just feel it, which I think works so well with not just Tenet, but a lot of Nolan's movies, where it's more about, like, you can try to understand all of the little things, but you don't have to understand it. And it may even be better if you're not a genius physicist kind of person, that a lot of it is like, he just tells you enough of it to make sense or sound plausible and get you on board. And then he does that with, I think Inception is probably the best example, where he's trying to tell you about dreams, and then he just tells you a couple of things that everybody knows about dreams. The kick when you feel like you're falling and you wake up, you're like, oh, okay, that's how you get out of a dream. I totally get that. And time going slower in a dream and all of this stuff, like, he tells you enough and you're like, sure, I buy into that. That makes total sense. And so that is all that you really need. You don't need all of the other stuff. It's just like, it looks like it's going backwards. They're going backwards in time from where they were to back towards where they came from. That's all you need to know, basically.
Well, then she shows him the video, right? Where it's like, it looks like he's dropping it, but it's actually reversed. So the bullet's like returning to his hand.
And he has all of these brilliant questions, like, what does that mean for like free will and all of this stuff? It's like, well, either way, that it wouldn't have happened unless you made it happen, and either direction you play the tape, you made it happen. I think it just does a good job of catching all of those doubters who would have had those like gotcha questions. It either answers them immediately, or it says it doesn't actually matter, just forget about it. It's like, focus on the things I'm telling you, that matters to the story. The rest of it you can think about and question and all this stuff, but there's no real answer.
Yeah. And then he tells her, like, I'm not seeing apocalypse here. I'm not seeing the end of the world here.
Sending some bullets backwards.
And so she takes him to that hallway and pulls out like a couple drawers full of random items. I love that it's not one specific kind. I love how random it is, as she's trying to explain to him, like, the more objects that are inverted, that have their entropy all fucked with, the worse it is for everyone, because it'll eventually make its impact.
Yeah. Which I did not understand that concept until about my fourth time watching it, where I was like, oh my God, is that what they're worried about happening? I finally figured it out. We'll get to that in a minute.
Now,
but she also uses big words that I didn't understand.
Does use a couple big words.
She's like,
I got the dictionary.
Well, she talks about those objects are the detritus of a coming war. And I was like, I don't know what detritus means, but it just means like debris or rubble or
waste or debris of any kind.
Yeah. So it's just the debris of a coming war. It's just the artifacts that have, which sounds incredibly ominous this early in the movie.
Right.
So it's a great line.
Fun fact about that hallway shot, right, of all those drawers.
Yeah.
At a certain point, those drawers are hand painted down that aisle.
Oh, really?
Yes.
They're not like functional drawers.
No, they're hand painted.
That's awesome.
But it looks so real. Again,
it does.
No green screen. What? It's 2023, and a movie like Tenet does not have green screen. It only gets crazier.
Yeah, it's true. So from there, the protagonist goes to Mumbai and meets up with. He makes a phone call and he says he needs to meet this arms dealer because he wants to see like where these bullets were manufactured. Maybe he can figure out how they went backwards in time. He goes there. He meets Neil, who is just apparently assigned by whatever contact he contacted to help him meet this arms dealer or get into his building. Played by Robert Pattinson, one of my favorite roles of his.
He's so. I love that. Like, I thought he was awesome the first time I saw this movie, but every time I watch Tenet, I am like, he almost steals this whole movie away from the protagonist, from John David Washington. Like, he comes close because he's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, he's so enjoyable, and I completely agree. And I think after you've seen it one time, then you kind of know his character arc, and you picking up all the hints that he's dropping throughout it, that he knows more than he's letting on, and why. And that makes it even more fun. It's fun the first time, but there's so many layers that he throws in there because he understands the character in the story before you do, that it's very rewatchable.
Yeah. Oh, I love when he's like, what does he order? He orders like a tequila or something, and then he's like, and he'll have a Diet Coke. It's such a like, this guy's lame, and he's like, what if I wanted to have something to drink? You don't drink on the job.
Like, I normally drink seltzer water. He's like, no, you don't.
Yeah, no, you don't.
But they need to go into this arms dealer's house, and the way they get into it is, of course, in a Christopher Nolan movie, the most elaborate way possible. And the most entertaining way possible.
It's so bonkers.
And I love the dialogue leading up to it. It was like, well, it's bungee jumpable. And he's like, I don't think bungee jumpable is a word, but even so, you shouldn't. And he's like, and then he talks about, well, we're not going to bungee jump out. Well, we might bungee jump out, but we're definitely going to bungee jump in. And you're like, what are you talking about? And then he shows you. And they like use water balloon launchers to launch these lines up, and then they have these cool vests on with these like ropes down their back.
Yeah,
and then they just like launch themselves up
literally
into the building.
It's on the pulley system, and it's like mechanized, and they're locked in place until they're not. So the tension of the rope is what like pulls them up to the building. It's bonkers. Who's fucking?
Yeah. And when they're up there, that's where he does the thing where he meets the dude who he thinks is the arms dealer, and then you find out, no, it's actually the lady, and she's using her husband. Yeah, Priya. She's using her husband as the front of or the face as an arms dealer, but she's actually running things. And he does the hand gesture, and she realizes, oh, you're in on the Tenet thing. And so they have a conversation. And she tells him all the things about Sater is this arms dealer who needs plutonium 241, and you need to basically go find him and all this stuff, and then sets him up with I think she sets him up with Sir Michael.
Yeah. Well, you're the one watching it.
I know. I just went over that part, but then they bungee jump out by it's so subtle but so clever, where he jumps out of the building, and then all of the ropes on his back are what he was using to bungee jump out. So once they get to the bottom, he doesn't have that on his
they unravel out, which is kind of crazy.
That's the word I was looking for, unravel. And so then he goes to meet Sir Michael, who is I completely just blamed.
It's Michael Caine,
the guy who's in
and there's
every
something
single
about
Nolan
seeing
movie.
Michael Caine in a Chris Nolan movie, thanks to him being Alfred, where you're like, it's Michael Caine.
Yeah, it's so fun, and he has the smallest role in this movie, but it is so fun to see.
But it's so good to see Michael Caine in a Nolan film. I dread when Michael Caine passes away, because he's pretty old now.
Yeah, he's up there.
And he does not appear in a Christopher Nolan film. I will be sad. I will be very sad.
I will too. And so this is everything leading up to all of this stuff is very basic spy thriller stuff. Nothing really crazy has happened other than the conversation about entropy and time travel. And you're like, what's happening? And then it goes back to normal spy stuff. And so they talk about, there's this guy, Sater, he's an arms dealer. You should get in contact with his wife because she is a art estimator, whatever you call this, appraiser. She's an art appraiser. And there's this whole weird situation where she appraised fake, and this guy had another fake, and so they have it, and so they want to give it to the protagonist to get appraised so that he can like have an in with her and apparently meet this arms dealer.
Right. They're using his. It's not even vanity. It's not even. It's weird. The art piece is like it's a Goya,
which I never heard of before.
Which I had never heard of. But then again, I was like, I know not like 5 sophisticated enough to know what that is.
Yeah.
Is this a real artist? If it's a real artist, let us know.
Yeah. I could Google it, but why bother?
I'm kind of scared to Google after trying to read the definition of entropy. So
that's true.
But yeah, he's like told, hey, use the wife to get in with the guy, and you don't have to utilize like sex. Just utilize
seduction.
This piece of art. Do that, because if you have have this art piece, then it'll raise red flags, and that's what will draw Sater out, because the wife told him his copy is real, but it's fake. So
yeah, and so he meets the wife, and one of the things I love, we haven't talked about it yet, but John David Washington's character is called the protagonist.
Like everyone calls him the protagonist,
and he doesn't have a name. And it's funny. It's like a weird drinking game that I've come up with the many times that I've watched it. Every time someone introduces themselves to him and he deflects it and doesn't introduce himself, when you're watching it, it feels so natural and normal and you don't even mind.
Right.
But if you're paying attention, you're like, that happened again. That happened again. Like Neil introduced himself. This lady introduced himself. Kat, all of these people. And he's just like, Goya, I'm here to deliver. Like,
right. She's like, Mr. Goya? No, Goya? I have a Goya.
Like, yeah. And you're like, oh, now we're moving on from the introduction now. It's so funny. And so, yeah, try that every time he gets introduced and doesn't tell you his name. Take a shot. But she immediately is like, this is a fake, and I've seen one like this before. And then they have this whole conversation of, I am using it for information in order to meet your husband, basically. Yeah. And then she tells basically her life story of she is a captive of her husband because I didn't understand this part at first. And I just assumed that I missed a lot, but it seems, I guess, pretty simple in the sense that she appraised an art piece legitimately, believed it was real. Her husband bought it for $9 million, and then it ended up being a fake. And instead of doing anything about, like, I guess, recouping that, he's holding it over her as like a failure of hers, and using it that if she doesn't do whatever he wants and let him do whatever he wants, like take his son, and he can control her, then he would out her as a terrible art appraiser or something.
So, well, he's already kind of like obviously super abusive physically and verbally. He's already got so much power, and he's already bought her so much. She's cost him a lot of money. So he's made it pretty clear that anything she attempts to do against him, he'll completely destroy her life, and he'll do that in the kind of most malicious way of ripping her son away from her, permanently taking her child away. And the child
is the only thing she cares about.
Yeah, and her son is the only thing that she's like truly so dedicated to. So it's basically, I've always taken that as the art piece was just kind of like an example of something, just another piece of his power over her. And it was just another, like, kind of God damn it moment from her. Because she had known someone, they were trying to, like, weren't they trying to set up kind of a fake deal or whatever? Like the fake art piece was intentionally sold to the husband to help her get out.
I think that's what he
Or
believes.
that's
but
what he believed, yeah.
She tells the protagonist that it was legitimately a mistake on her
Yeah,
part, and she did
but
not.
because he doesn't believe her and he only takes
Yeah.
what he perceives to be true, that's what he's
Mhm.
holding over her. And it cost him
Yeah, and
$9 million.
Yeah, and I do agree. I think it's just like one of many things.
Right.
He says later on that all of the things that he does for them in his arms dealing and stuff, puts the clothes on her back, puts her kid in school and all this stuff. And so he definitely holds their whole life and what he's provided over her
Yeah.
as a way to control her. So if it wasn't that, it would be something else.
Right.
It's just abusive.
That just happens to be the end for the protagonist.
But I love her. I love
she's so awesome.
the character of Kat, and I love the actress Elizabeth Debicki.
So awesome to watch.
Apparently, Nolan wrote it explicitly for her.
Not originally.
Not
originally. He had the character completely, well, not completely different, but she was written differently. His wife told him to watch the movie Widows that she's in. And after he watched Widows, he rewrote the character for her. What I really respect of Nolan in terms of casting her in the role of Kat, but the actress is like 6'3" or something like that.
Yeah, she's tall.
Crazy tall.
Amazon.
And most of the time, a studio will try to kind of trick the viewer and make tall actors or actresses seem shorter and vice versa for short ones, unless you're Danny DeVito, and then there's no helping that. He's just always short. But Nolan and his costume designer,
and if you're Tom Cruise, it's in your contract. You have to appear taller.
Right? Actually, that's true. But when it came to her, they decided we're not going to shy away from her height. In fact, let's actually kind of accentuate, like, let's make it obvious that she towers over almost everybody in the movie.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know what else we need? Instead of just the slender dress or her formal wear, let's give her high heels. Let's put a 6'3" woman in like 5-inch heels.
Yeah.
Perfect. But she kills it. I love it. I thought that was really cool. What a testament to a whole crew of filmmakers who, instead of going the normal route of being like, well, we have to manipulate your look so that you fit a certain whatever. Nolan, these guys are like, nah, you're tall as shit, so we're going to show you as being tall as hell.
Yeah, because it's awesome.
It's awesome.
But
and
there's no reason to downplay it.
And it's so much better. She comes across so real and genuine. Now, I haven't seen much with her, except for she's also in one of my favorite other spy movies. She's in The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
I hope I'm saying the right actress. I'm pretty positive I am. But she's awesome. She's so good.
She is, yeah.
And their whole dinner scene is, I love that dinner scene. It's such a like brutal conversation between the two, and then the goons show up. I love the goons.
Yeah, and the fight in the kitchen is just another great example.
Fucking fight in the kitchen
of his physicality, that he goes from just like walking like normal to just like throwing these punches in such a great way.
In a great way, and it's such a like non-stylized way, which makes that fight scene so effective. Feel real. I love it.
Definitely.
When he grabs the fucking cheese grater and just starts like smacking the guy over the head with it, like
it grates the shit out of his face.
That's my favorite part of the fight.
Yeah, it's awesome. I just looked up John David Washington's height. He's only 5'9".
Oh, really?
Yeah, which makes it even more like seeing them at this different level. Yeah. She's like half a foot taller than him.
By the way, I checked. I was right. She is in The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Okay.
Go me.
I'm going to have to rewatch it because I love that movie.
All right.
But yeah, the way that he walks out of the kitchen after that fight and like puts his coat back together, it's a very Bond thing.
Super Bond.
Yeah.
I love the reaction of her driver where he's telling her, she wants to get out of there because she's like,
Mhm.
someone wanted to help me and take this guy down, and now he's being
Mhm.
killed in the kitchen. Like, you can tell
She doesn't want to
immediately
see it.
she's been put through this already. Like, this is
Yeah.
bringing up some bad trauma. This is
Yeah.
triggering for her. And the driver's like, he wants you to see it. It's, he gets what he wants. And then, he comes out, buttons his coat, like, whatever.
Yeah.
I love the driver's reaction where it's that instant, like, fuck me. It, like, speeds
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. He's like, oh shit, you shouldn't see this part. It's not supposed to happen.
Go, go, go.
But yeah, just the way that's all set up, it's so ominous. And before you've even met the villain of the movie, you're like, this guy is scary.
And he is. We'll get
He
to
is
him.
super scary. So let's see, where are we? So where are we in time? I need to go back.
We're at the kitchen. Well, we just finished the kitchen fight.
After the kitchen fight, they basically jump into planning the airport heist.
Yeah.
And the way that they set that up is, so this whole movie is paced so quickly because there's a lot of shit to fit in 2.5 hours. And so I love the airport heist and the highway heist because the planning phases are like a quick conversation and then you're doing it.
And then you're doing it.
There's hardly any like lead up. It's like, hey, have you heard of a Freeport? It's at the airport. They put a bunch of paintings in it. This painting is there. Also, there's something weird in the middle of it. We don't know what it is.
Well, and
but Sador owns and operates all this stuff.
I love that scene. So the first couple times that I saw the movie, in the theater with you, and then I bought it when it came out, rewatched it. You get so hung up on the painting. But they, like, the protagonist has he even points it out on a fucking map of the building.
Yeah. They have a blueprint and they're like, hey, there's a thing in the middle. We don't know what it is.
And they're like, that's the target. But the whole setup is like, you as a viewer are trying to figure out what is the painting. And the whole thing is like, we just needed a way to figure out what was in this room.
Yeah. Yeah. And she knows a lot about it because the painting is there and all this stuff, and Sador owns it, and they go there apparently pretty regularly because he needs to go there a lot, which is a hint. And so he kind of tells it about it, and then the protagonist is telling Neil about it, and that's just the whole setup of it. I love when they're planning it and they're trying to figure out how to get in there, and Neil's like, well, we could crash a plane. And then he's like, not from the air.
Right.
Don't
not
be so
from the
dramatic.
Air.
And just the way he talks about not from the air, it's nothing so dramatic. I imagine that's how Christopher Nolan is pitching this to Warner Brothers, where he's like, I'm going to crash a plane, not from the air. Don't be so dramatic. It's kind of a big plane, though. So
it's funny you said that. In the making of that's on the Blu-ray, which seriously, I'm sure it's on YouTube. Everyone should watch this making of. They talk about that scene in the planning, and you are absolutely correct, Jake.
Okay.
When he was telling the crew of like, we're going to crash an airplane, their original thought was, well, it's Nolan, so we can't make a digital explosion. So they're like, okay, so we'll like make miniatures and blow them up. No, a real plane, but like not what you're thinking. Like not
not just from the sky.
Right,
like, you'll just drive.
And they're
it
like,
into
okay,
a
real plane. We're gonna blow up a real plane. All right, and then they were like, we found this yard full of old, like, discontinued planes. They're not operational. They're sitting in this giant field. And they were looking at a bunch that were like, well, we could probably blow this one up. They're like small. I mean, they're big, but they're small planes. And I guess Nolan, just like Neil says, where he's like, this is a little dramatic, where Nolan was like, how about that one? And he pointed to the fucking 747. And everyone's reaction, I guess, was like, of course, that's the plane you want to blow up.
Yeah, I love how he's a very opposed to green screen and VFX. He does use visual effects
because
in
sometimes
all
you
of his
have
movies.
to.
But even by his standards of as few VFX as
Yeah,
possible, Tenet is way lower.
it's the
I saw a
lowest one
thing
out of
that,
all of his movies.
yeah, all of those other ones like
I have
Batman
the
and
stat.
Interstellar, it's like 600 and something, 400 to 600, and Tenet was like
So
250 or
I
something.
have the stat.
Okay.
So Tenet has a total of 280 visual effects shots. So that's
Okay.
like digital special effects.
Yeah.
That is less than most modern romantic comedies use.
That's amazing.
So for you
Yeah, Dark
people,
Knight Rises, Batman Begins, and Inception all had between 450 and 620.
right.
The Matrix had over 400. Avatar: The Way of Water has
I was like, that's
3,289.
going to be an absurd amount.
It's it's 3,009 more.
Like, it didn't specifically call out like a romantic comedy. I just like that the stat was like, this is less than most rom coms made today. I'm
Yeah.
like, you're telling me I could go watch what's that shitty one I just watched? Somebody I Used to Know or whatever. And that
Okay.
probably has more digital effects in it than Tenet. And when you
Yeah.
watch Tenet, the way we perceive movies, our brains would automatically be like, that's fake. There's no way they did
Yeah.
that. No, they did.
Yeah. I love that he originally did plan to do miniatures and CGI for it, but then it was weirdly cheaper to actually get a real plane and blow it up, which is not terribly common. A lot of the appeal of CGI is that it tends to be cheaper than practical effects.
Right.
But in this giant budget movie, he's like, let's just be frugal and blow up a real plane. That's hilarious to me.
So they did. Um,
So they infiltrate. So the whole point is that if they blow up the plane into the building, then it will set off the lockdown procedures, and then then they can pick the locks on the doors and get to the center of the thing while trying to avoid halide gas, which will suffocate them immediately. It's very exciting. The music is very
oh my
exciting,
God.
but then they get to the middle of this pentagon, and unlock both of the doors, and there's a thing in the middle of the room.
Yeah, there's like it's two turnstiles, but it looks like one.
Yeah. And the Neil and the protagonist unlock two different doors, which are leading to two separate rooms separated by glass in the
Yeah, there's
middle.
like a glass with chicken wire partition in between. It's separating. You can
Yeah.
tell like it has to be separated.
Yeah.
But you
And
have no clue why.
There's bullet holes in the glass, and the protagonist warns Neil not to touch it because it hasn't happened yet. And you're like, what? Where are we going with this? And then he picks up the gun that's been taken apart, and this figure, a masked figure,
Well, yeah, the
dives
turnstiles
out.
start turning, so you're like, "Oh shit, something's happening," which is
Yeah.
always a great moment in like an
It's
action
so
thriller,
exciting.
and especially in a spy thriller where you're like, "Oh
Mhm.
shit, something
Yeah.
wasn't." Oh,
And it's always great when the heroes of the movie don't know what's going
Mhm.
on, and they're like, I didn't anticipate this. I don't know where this is going. And so you're finding out with them. I love when that happens. But the way that this guy dives out of
dude,
the
it's crazy.
thing, two guys,
Yep.
one on each side, dive out of this turnstile, and one runs away, one starts attacking him, but he's has the force. He can like reach out, and the gun parts fly towards his hand, and then he assembles the gun and starts firing at him, and then as the fight progresses, you realize there's something else going on here, because he's like moving in erratic ways, and gravity doesn't seem to affect him in the same way, and you don't know what's going on, but it's weird and it's exciting, and you're here for it. At least I'm here
Right.
for it.
Oh yeah. Oh. Sorry.
You're bored by it,
I'm
but
not.
I'm here
I'm
for
not.
it.
We're recording late at night. Fuck you. I was trying to suppress it so hard.
Yeah.
I love the editing on this one is so crazy. So yeah, you
Mhm.
get this weird, possibly once again, Nolan's like everyone thought the anti-gravity fight scene in Inception was bonkers. Watch
Mhm.
this. We're gonna train our actors to fight backwards.
Mhm.
You're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But out of two of them, one of them's fighting backwards, the other one is fighting in like normal time,
Yeah.
and we're gonna film it from several different angles at different times. So this should be fun. Go! But it goes from
And
like
it's
this.
like the first shot scene that they filmed of the movie.
It is.
Like, let's just get this out of the way
Well,
and
you
figure it
got to
out.
figure out how you're going to film the rest of it at some point. So might as well
Yeah.
get your feet wet.
Yeah.
But I love how you go from this crazy, unique fist fight that is all
Mhm.
over the place. And then it cuts to Neil, who is chasing down the other guy that ran out of the other side of the turnstile, and it's normal. So
Mhm.
your brain's like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
why isn't this guy twitchy as hell, too?
Mhm.
He's not. But yeah, Neil chases him down. They have like the fastest. It's not even like an altercation. Neil manages to pull his helmet off, and that's about it.
Yeah,
And then
but you
his
don't see anything because it's just down the hall
yeah,
at
you don't
Neil
see
and not
shit. Neil
around the
just kind
corner.
of like not worth it.
But you see on his face, he's like, oh, he's surprised by something and you don't know what.
Yeah. And then decides to go back to the protagonist to help him out
Mm-hmm.
because he was one in the actual dogfight.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but that fight scene is like it's so there's so much to the fight scene that if you like blink,
Mm-hmm.
you completely miss. Like the
Yeah.
first two times I saw this movie, I never even realized that the protagonist like stabs the dude's arm.
Yeah.
I didn't see it at all the first couple times I watched the movie, and then rewatching it again over time, and then especially the last couple weeks, I was like, oh,
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that where you're like, oh, that is why he does that, because that means that this happens. Oh, I get it.
yeah. I was
It's a
very
riddle.
I was thankful I was watching it by myself because I feel like anyone else would have been like, really? Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important that he gets stabbed, and it makes more sense later on.
Right.
But yeah, you kind of, I notice it more in the reverse than I do in the forward,
Yeah.
that it's more clear. So after that, they do escape
Well,
this
the way
fight.
the fight ends, I feel like we have to mention the way the fight ends because it's
Mhm.
so odd. The dude's on
Yeah.
the floor and all of a sudden he like gets sucked through the bay door
Yeah.
that's gotten blown open a little bit, but it's not open. It's like all of a sudden inverted itself and moved backwards. And
Yeah.
you're
And then
like,
the jet engine is like pulling it or blowing it. You don't really know what's
yeah,
going
he
on.
just like he slides underneath the bay door, and you're like, the fuck? And even the protagonist has that look of like, what the hell was that?
Yeah. So that was weird. And he's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
But I love the interview after, not the interview, but the conversation between Neil and the protagonist where they're in the hotel room, and Neil's like, well, I've seen too much because that was not what we went in there to get. And then he tells him like kind of the things that he learned at the scientist office
Yeah.
of like the entropy of objects are being inverted and all this stuff. And Neil's like, oh, you mean like these two scientists, they had these theories about these electrons and electrons, there's only one electron that's going back and forth in time and all of this stuff. And he's like, sure, I guess. And Neil's like, well, I have a degree in physics. And he's like, well, try to keep up then. But that's like a real thing that I was deeply Googling and trying desperately to understand, is that, hold on, where is that note about that guy? There's a bunch of scientists where Richard Feynman and John Wheeler in 1940, they had this one electron universe theory, and where there's not like multiple electrons, there's just one, and it's able to go forward and backward through time. And so if you actually look into what he mentions, and as like the inspiration for it, ends up being Nolan's like inspiration for the premise of the story, of like other things in nature may be able to do this, and we could potentially do this as well. It's crazy. So I think from there he goes to have a conversation with Priya. It's more or less just like, you need to get in and meet Sator, and the 241.
And that's when he asks her about like, is it safe to have British intelligence around? Which I always find kind of funny, because like, you've already been hanging out with British intelligence.
Yeah. Sir Michael Crowley was British intelligence. But then that's what gets him to get Kat to get him onto Sator's boat. And so that's the portion of the film where he essentially goes into the lion's den and meet Sator as the audience first, because he drops off Kat at her yacht, and the villain lives on a yacht, which is a very Bond villain thing to do. And you meet Kenneth Branagh, who has a Russian accent and is as formidable and imposing as you imagine he would be, when he like tells him like he sent her son away and she's hanging out with her friend, and he's so scary.
He's frightening. Like, I think this might be one of Kenneth Branagh's best roles.
Yeah,
he's been around forever. He's already known for just being like such a theatrical, charismatic actor. All of his characters they're up there. But there's something about watching him in this role that I'm like, you are deeply disturbing to watch. Just in the way he responds to situations, his outbursts, just the constant checking of his pulse and being like, huh, that ain't bad for that kind of exertion. And you're like, you are fucked up.
Yeah, after you just beat a man almost to death with a gold bar.
Right.
Yeah, he's terrifying the entire time. Before he's done anything, and then he starts doing things, and you're like, oh, you're even scarier.
Right,
somehow.
Like, oh, you really are this horrible. Cool.
Yeah, it's great. But so Kat gets the protagonist invited to a dinner where he meets Andrei Sador, who gives him a very colorful description of how he's going to cut a hole in his throat. I love how he says, we're going to cut your throat, not a slice, like a puncture through your throat.
Like a hole.
Yeah.
To stuff your balls in.
We'll stick your balls into them. It's extremely satisfying to see somebody who you don't like choke on their balls. And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, like I said, very scary man.
That scene is great, because to me, I'm like, he's an effective villain. The only reason he doesn't kill the protagonist right there, like he said he's going to, is because the protagonist mentions the opera and hints to like, I know what was going on with the 241.
Which is, I love how the protagonist does not get flustered by that very elaborate torture threat. He's like, yeah, that's cool. Do you like opera though?
Cool story, bro. Cool story.
Yeah, exactly. But it does catch his attention. He's like, all right, I'll keep you around and figure out what you know about.
But just that the way that like he doesn't even greet him, he doesn't care. I think Seder might be the only character that's like, I don't give a shit who you are, what you're
Yeah.
for. His first line is, "How do you want to die?"
Yeah. So, it's nice to meet you. I would like to die old,
Right,
please.
like you chose the wrong profession.
Mm,
To me, that just shows like what an effective way to get your audience to understand how evil your villain is.
hmm.
Because yeah, he lets the protagonist live because you kind of have to have plot for the rest of the movie.
Right.
Um, but you imagine and assume anyone before the protagonist who has crossed paths with Seder
Mm,
that Seder doesn't like he has just straight up killed him. He's pulled the trigger.
right.
You know,
Yeah. Not
whether it's
no hesitation at
no
all.
hesitation, no care, and that's always been like a thing with movie villains is a lot of them will hesitate or worry about their big speeches and all that instead of just pulling
Yeah.
the trigger. Seder is not that guy. He's just like,
Hmm.
oh no, I'm gonna shoot someone, and he does later on where he gives a
Yeah.
countdown and actually pulls the trigger. You don't
Yeah.
see that a lot from movie villains.
No, that's true. And so he invites, because of the opera thing, in a reference to the beginning of the movie where they were trying to get that weirdly encapsulated plutonium thing at the opera. He invites him to go sailing,
Mhm.
the protagonist to go sailing. And so they go sailing on the craziest boats I've ever seen, where they're like these hydrofoil things that rise up out of the
Yeah.
water and go crazy fast. And
So on
they're
the
cool.
the making of, I forget the name of those boats, but on the making of, they show them film that whole sequence.
Okay.
Those boats are insane,
They go wicked fast.
wicked fast, and they're massive. And
Yeah.
you can't mount IMAX cameras to them.
Oh, darn.
So what they did was they like built half versions of those boats and
Mm,
mounted the IMAX to the main boat, which the half boat was attached to. But the actors are still in the
okay.
water, like they're still doing this, and they had
Yeah.
to hire this whole team that professionally race those boats.
Mm,
I forget the name of it,
yeah.
but the actors had to learn how to sail them essentially, and they
Yeah.
joke about in the making of like, yeah, it was funny watching these guys' faces when we told them, well, we're going to drop an actor in the water from a speeding boat. And they're like, no, you're not. And they went, no, no, we are. We're going to drop him in the water.
Not if you want them to live.
Right.
Not if you want Kenneth Branagh to make more movies.
Stunt doubles. Uh,
There you go.
but that's the scene I feel draws the most criticism for sound and not being able to hear the dialogue
Yeah.
because they're wearing the helmets with the microphones. They're in the water. It's loud. That whole
There's a lot of
sequence
wind.
is so loud, and there's so much happening. And then they have like this conversation of, "What do you
Mm,
know about the 241?" Or he says like, "What do you know about opera?"
yeah.
And they start discussing where the 241 is, what the plan
Hmm.
of like teaming up might look like.
Yeah. There's a lot of plot divulged in that scene that you kind of do want to hear.
Yes. Luckily, when they released it, physical form or streaming,
Mhm.
subtitles. Even if you don't
Yes.
want to watch the whole movie with the subtitles, you can turn them on real quick for that scene. You get the quick gist of what they're talking about because the scene's
Hmm.
actually not that long.
Right.
And then you can turn your subtitles off. But
Hmm.
subtitle come handy in this movie a few times.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I watched it with subtitles a couple of times just to make sure I didn't miss any of the things I was supposed to be paying attention to. But at that moment, Kat unclips her husband and tries to kill him basically
Which should have
because
killed him.
he saved the Goya that was in the
Yeah.
airport, and he gives this speech about, well, I have a lot of premonitions about what things may happen in the future, and I just had a hunch that I needed to pull it out, and so she thought she was in the clear, realized she's still under his thumb, and so she's kind of very upset about it, understandably. But the protagonist saves him and doesn't let him drown or get terribly mangled in this fast boat crash. And so he dives in and saves him, and then they get back to the yacht. She is upset and like, she's like, how dare you save him? And he's like, no, I need him, and he's not what you think he is. He's not just an arms dealer. He's so much more. And then that's when they have like the face-to-face conversation, the protagonist and Sater talking about, he gives a lot of very interesting, I guess, backstory to his character, where he grew up in Russia. Don't lecture me about radiation, because I grew up as a young man digging up nuclear warheads that had been lost, and that's how I like made my fortune, essentially. That's what he claims, is that he would do the jobs nobody else wanted to, and in his home, Stalsk 12, dig up these warheads that had gone missing or whatever. And it's so interesting to me. There's like a flashback sequence that's filmed, and he digs up a warhead and he opens it up, and there's a piece of paper inside of it that's like laminated, and then you only see it for a second, and then underneath it there's like gold bars in there, and you're like, I didn't know they put gold bars in warheads. That's a little weird. And so I was like pausing it and trying to read the paper. It's almost entirely in Russian.
I was going to say, you're not going to read the paper.
But it does say Andrei Sador on it.
Yeah.
And you're like, and then I'm like, why is his name on this paper that he's just dug up as a young man? And I think it's from the past. Is like, you get into very quickly the dead drop scenario where the future is sending, or the past is sending, these objects through just burying them and waiting for the past to find them. And so he is able to send them to himself in the future, puts his own name on it to tell him, hey, me,
right.
I need you to know this. And here's a bunch of gold and all this stuff. And you're going to be rich and famous and all this stuff. So hints at what's to come very soon. But then you get, I would say, the second to most scary scene,
which we already said, but yeah, it's important. You gotta note it.
Sater goes into Kat's room basically to confront her. Hey, what the fuck? You dropped me off of a speeding boat, almost killed me. The way he takes off his belt,
dude, it's one of the
way he takes off his cufflinks and sets them down, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. You don't want to damage them. And then he takes off his belt, and then he puts the cufflinks in the belt holes
and like make sure he locks them in, and then wraps it around his hand.
And you're like, oh, those are like to make the belt hurt more.
Well, and she's telling him like, what are you gonna do to me? I forget what she says to him, but he like throws a pillow at her, and he tells her like, bite down on that. It's so gross. Like,
yeah. And she screams in like a terrible way, and you're like, I am uncomfortable.
Right, you're like, situation. This could get real. And your brain, it's one of those things, you and I have talked about this a lot. And I actually had an interesting conversation about this with a coworker, but I will focus. Where your brain, and Nolan knew this and just leaned into it so heavy, of like, I'm going to let the audience, their minds, you understand this guy is already evil. You know, you just get a real bad sense of who he is as a character. To see him like put the cufflinks in, lock it in place, and start wrapping it around his hand, I feel like had the scene not even gone the way it goes, where like the interruption happens, I don't think we ever would have actually seen him hit Kat with the belt. And you don't, but your brain immediately just starts like picturing the worst images of him hitting her with the belt. It never happens, but it's so effective to make you just be so uncomfortable watching him stand over her.
Right. You don't have to show the abuse to understand that he's abusive. Right. it's the same thing with all of those kinds of things. You can imply it, and in a lot of cases that's more effective because your imagination runs
And it
wild,
does on
and
that scene.
it's worse than anything
It
that they
does.
could
I've
show
seen the
you.
movie a handful of times. Just watched it yesterday, and my
Mhm.
brain, like, I know exactly where the scene goes. I know you don't
Mhm.
see any like physical violence in that particular scene, minus the pillow
Mhm.
throw. But my brain, every time I watch it, is immediately just like the worst, the worst, the worst, the worst. And you're like, this is gross, this is gross, this is gross.
Yeah. And it's all due to the acting. She is an incredible actress, and she's terrified but also trying to hold her ground.
Mm-hmm.
And he is imposing and terrifying and basically saying that he will never let her go.
Well,
He
yeah.
will, if he can't have her, nobody can have her. And so she will either stay and suffer or be killed. Those are her options at this
Right.
point. And it's just the performances make it exactly how
It's
impactful
so
that it is.
intense. That close up of him when he says,
Mm-hmm.
like, if I can't have you, no one can.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's heard. I feel like that line has been used a handful of times in other stuff, but his delivery of it is
Mm-hmm.
so unique because he like just draws it out, and it's like
Exactly.
strained and intense, and it's like he's not yelling it at her, and it just
Yeah.
makes it worse to hear it in the way he does it. And you're like, this is.
Yeah. It's true.
But he gets
Um,
interrupted before anything can happen, and he's all pissy
he
about
does,
that.
because he gets a delivery of gold bars. The protagonist goes to watch him receive it
Mhm.
and sees that he gets these bars. They are inverted. And this is kind of the first time in a while we've seen, oh yeah, there's some weird sci-fi stuff going on. The bars like fly up to his hand, and so you're like, that's interesting. And then he beats this dude's
Well, he
face in with
like,
one of them because he tries to steal one of
yeah,
them.
he does the inverted, and just kind of like you see him have that quick pause, and he just kind of looks at the guy.
He's like counting them.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and the guy, pulls it out of his back pocket, like, okay, I fessed up. He looks at the bar and just like starts
Yeah.
beating him over the head, and you're like, this is
Terrifying.
damn.
Yeah. And yeah, for that scene to follow the bedroom scene with Kat, you're like, I'm so glad she's still alive.
Yeah, he like you see the gold bar, it's covered in blood, and that was what we mentioned earlier. He taps on his
Yeah.
little like heart monitor, and he's like, "Huh, not bad for that kind of exertion."
Hmm. And so the protagonist gets caught. He brings him in and tries to. He's like, I know you're CIA, and he's like, yeah, of course I'm CIA. Any clever person would get recruited by the CIA. And then he tries to use the "oh, we live in a Twilight world" line on him, and
Mhm.
he's like, doesn't fall for it because he's not an idiot. And but then the Sator apparently believes him and says, if you want to steal the plutonium 241 for me, you have to go do this and all this stuff. And so he does. I love when he throws him the gold bar as like fronting him the cash to do this heist, and he drops it. I feel like it's because he doesn't want Sator to know that he knows that it's inverted and how to manipulate inverted objects and all this stuff. So he just like drops it and then picks it up like more carefully instead of like it doesn't behave how an inverted object normally would, because he doesn't want to like let him know, and so he doesn't catch on. And I think it's cool.
Yeah, and I love his line of like, "Let's hope you handle the 241 better than you handle that."
Mm-hmm. So they need to plan a heist to steal the plutonium 241, which is the same thing that was in the opera at the beginning. The way that they need to steal it is it's in a truck being transported through Northern Europe. The truck is monitored by GPS, so they can't stop it. If it stops, then that raises red flags. So they need to steal it while it's moving, and also not take it off course or anything like that. And they set this heist up even faster than the last one, where it's
This
literally
is
just a conversation. It's like, we need 4 heavy trucks and a fast car that doesn't look fast, and we'll just knock
And
it out.
remember, no paper trails. We're not gonna like don't
Yeah,
let anyone know.
yeah. Because if it goes into the record, then it's saved, and all of those information that you send out in the world, texts, emails, all that stuff, it's basically being transmitted into the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way communication works, which is very interesting to me. So that, yeah, everything's off the radar and off the books so that they can't be interrupted by somebody from the future. Um, and so the actual heist is awesome.
It's pretty
The
cool.
the trucks and all of the stuff that happens, it reminds me a lot of like The Dark Knight or something like that. If you liked the truck situation in that, he does a lot with trucks in those. But the music especially always just fires me up for this scene. And the song specifically, when the protagonist gets on the fire truck and it's just like that thumping,
Yeah.
I love it because it feels like it's thematically accurate, where the like synthesizer is coming in from one side and then it's being beaten back by the bass on the other side. It's just kind of, how
Well,
the movie is doing this.
it was like I said earlier. I mean, Nolan had what's his name, Ludwig something. I'm sure I'm
Ludwig Göransson.
Yeah, he was on set. He was essentially writing the score while watching them film the movie. Like he was there with them, so he was writing the music, watching the scene, and knowing, like, actually having a feel for what it looked like. It works because the music in Tenet is unreal.
It's so good. Everything about it's so good. And it's so interesting to me how Tenet is the first time in a long time that Hans Zimmer has not
Yep.
scored it. Apparently he was really liking his live concert tour and also gearing up for Dune, which was coming after this. But Nolan kind of does that, where he locks in on a composer for a while.
Yeah.
His first 4 movies were David Julian, and then the last several since Batman Begins have been Hans Zimmer. So I'm curious if he stays with Ludwig Göransson for a while. He's doing Oppenheimer. So Tenet, Oppenheimer, he's kind of on a trajectory for the next several movies, probably.
He might be, because I know Zimmer. I think Zimmer is a part of like the Warner Brothers. He might actually have a contract with Warner Brothers as well. But okay, I would love to see Zimmer's name attached to Nolan films again, because that's always been some of my favorite music ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Among the best. But the heist is interesting because all of the stuff that you're expecting is happening. The actual heist, the spy stuff is still happening. It's all very normal so far. And then at the same time, Andrei Sador takes Kat to another free port. This one is not at an airport, it's at a dock. And he's like, I got a bunch of the art from Oslo that was in that fire from the airplane crash. And I need you to just assess the pieces. And so she's like, okay, sure, whatever. She goes with them. When they get out of the car, there's the most ominous shot, which is one of my favorites. They're walking up and she looks through the separated partition between the like bay doors going into the Freeport, and there's a dude in a car with a gas mask on.
Well, yeah, he's got the oxygen mask on.
Oh yeah, oxygen mask on. And just the way it's shot, as it's like panning through the separators, and it's like solid and it slowly comes into view. I love that. It's the most small, ominous thing. You're like, what's that guy's deal? And
yeah. Well, because up to this point, we haven't seen any oxygen masks. So to see a guy sitting on the other side wearing it, you're immediately like, ugh.
Yeah.
Why?
That's concerning. And then probably the most important thing to talk about is how Andrei assaults Kat, literally, physically, completely beats the shit out of her. And you're like, everything I was worried about has come true in this movie.
The only thing you're thankful for from Sador is he's not using the cuffling belt on her.
It's true. That's true.
So
it could be worse.
we're at the scene. Haha, Dustin, remember to interject. Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
miracle.
yeah. I wrote a note. It's been sitting in front of me this whole time. Like, don't
I
forget,
should
don't
do.
forget.
I should do that more.
Um, not to spoil how I do things,
Peek behind the curtain.
right? But this scene in particular, I didn't notice it until this week
Mm-hmm.
because it's so effective. Of like, Sator is actually physically assaulting Kat, and you're like, this is gross. But I
Mm-hmm.
noticed it this week, and I was like, interesting. And then when I rewatched the movie again, I really paid attention to this little detail that Nolan chose to do in this movie, and it kind of calls back to Dunkirk. Did you notice anytime there's like excessive violence in Tenet, the
Mm-hmm.
camera cuts right at the moment of impact?
No,
So,
I can't say that I did.
so Sator assaulting Kat. If you watch the scene,
Mm-hmm.
you don't actually see him make any physical contact with her. The camera
Interesting.
cuts right before it happens. You see him spit on her and you
Yeah.
hear it, but you never
Yeah.
see it. And I was like, this is interesting. And then when I rewatched the movie, the most excessive violent scenes that you see in the film is like the car crash, gunshots here and there, but even during the darkest part of the movie where he's getting his teeth pulled out,
Mm-hmm.
the train goes by and interrupts what's happening. You
Yeah.
don't even hear it then.
Mm-hmm.
But every time there's excessive violence, up to one particular scene, which we'll get to, it's like the
Mm.
only scene that they actually show violence.
Okay.
But it's deserved and it's gratifying. And I remember your wife's reaction to it. But Nolan did this very well where he like, I don't need to rely on actually showing the audience,
Yeah.
that Kat's getting hit. You can hear her,
Well, it's
but I'm
it's
not going to
so
show the
effective.
actual impact. And it's so like intense to watch. And I thought
Yeah.
about that because I was like, man, I've been watching this movie thinking I'm actually seeing her get hit, but
Mm-hmm.
Nolan did such a great job, and the editing is so well done where it's like, nope, nope.
Yeah. And it would be so it's a fine line, and I think that he's walking that where if you show too much, especially of that
Mm-hmm.
situation where this man is beating up this woman, um, that you will turn off a lot of the audience
Yeah,
at a certain point. And so to walk that line of be like, tell the story, give you the whole perception of these characters and who he is and who she is and what she's enduring, so that the end is more gratifying and
yeah.
all of that stuff, and so that you understand him and his motives and all that stuff. To actually do that without doing that is pretty masterful, I
It's pretty
think.
masterful. When I realized it, and like when I thought I caught on to it and rewatched the movie again, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
this is brilliant. And I was like, he does this in Dunkirk. Dunkirk is a war film. It's one of the most intense war films. There's
Mm-hmm.
no blood. And when people are
Mm-hmm.
getting shot down, you don't see it. It's like cut right before it's happening, or like it's um oh shit, obstructed from your
Yeah.
view in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what a interesting choice for this filmmaker to make, showing these situations and just having that conscious decision of like, it's more effective and it moves the story along better if I
Mm-hmm.
don't actually show. It's almost like the antithesis of like, everyone has to see everything.
Right.
He's like, nope, you don't.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of filmmakers that will just show you it because they want you to feel terribly uncomfortable
Yeah.
and experience everything about that, which has its place to a degree, but it's also mostly not necessary. And unless the movie is about specifically experiencing that thing,
Right.
you can you can get 90% of the idea across without showing anything.
Yeah. So next time you like sit down and watch it, just
Oh, I will every time from now.
Watch that detail, and the editing is so like pinpoint.
Yeah. I can picture the kick, and I'm pretty sure you're completely right that it does cut right before he actually kicks her in the stomach.
It's crazy.
That's awesome. But he says a couple of interesting things. He's like, tell me everything as it happens and all of this stuff. And then you jump to the actual heist. The heist is fun and awesome to see.
Heist is cool. I don't know why watching him on the ladder just go across. It's just cool. Like, that's all he does.
Yeah.
But you're like, that's a speeding, like,
right.
All the elements are so dangerous.
Right. They're driving down the highway at normal driving speed while they've crushed these other villains' cars in between their cars. So they're locked up and smoking, and it's very energetic and chaotic, but awesome. And all very relatively normal, and not too much crazy happens. They get the 241 out of there, where they get it into the car, they start speeding away. And then you get different clues like, oh, I don't understand the radio chatter. And he's like, I thought you spoke Estonian. And he's like, it's not Estonian, it's backwards. And you're like, and then this car comes out of nowhere going, you think it's driving towards you at first, like across traffic or whatever. And then you're like, no, it's driving with traffic, just going backwards. And this scene, we haven't talked much about the sci-fi aspect of this. The rest of the movie is sci-fi aspects, so you're going to get a lot of it. But this highway chase specifically is the piece that hurts my brain the most. Because I start thinking about how they're the hero's car. So we'll follow the plot of the movie where the heroes are the red team. They are going forward in time. Yes. They're going forward in time down a highway. The villain is in the blue car and blue team car. He is going forward down the highway, but backwards in time. And so what you see are them chasing each other, one going backwards, one going forwards. Yes, they're doing this, the hand signal from the TENET signal. So one is going backwards, one going forward. But what this means is, I'm going to try to explain this in the way that I think it makes sense to me. What this means is the people that are going backwards in time, from their perception, are going forwards. Mm-hmm. And so if they are going forwards and chasing the other car, the other car looks like they are going backwards in time, because they look like they're driving backwards, running away from them when they're being chased forwards. You know what I'm saying? This is making less sense as I try to explain it.
But it's fun watching your brain be like...
But what it means to me is that for them to chase them while going backwards in time, it means that where they have to be in space is kind of where my brain is stuck. In order to be, I need like a diagram. I need like a whiteboard. I should have gotten a whiteboard for this. For them to be chasing them in space, they need to be where they were. The bad guys need to be where the good guys were at the right time in order to chase them. And they can do that because they have already gone through it in the future. I don't really know where I'm going with this. The point is that if you think about it too hard, it hurts.
It hurts. And it hurts really, really bad.
But does that really matter? Potentially not, because it's awesome to watch. And the simplest version is that they're just chasing them. It's a car chase.
It's a car chase that... See, I try not to like overcomplicate that one. I think I've just always accepted it it looks cool. It's something I haven't seen before. I already am not quantum scientifically smart enough to understand the physics of how time inversion works in this movie. So I just kind of accept that the blue team, who that's actually his hints throughout the movie, is red means you're moving forward in time, blue means you're moving backwards.
I love that in that scene, Kat's wearing a red dress and Andre's wearing like a blue suit, and she's not inverted, but he is. And so that helps you kind of keep it straight.
Right. It's, to me, it's basically kind of a hint to exactly what the protagonist is trying to avoid all around. Of if these two like actually converge, eventually one of them gives, so these objects are gonna give. So you kind of see, to me, it's kind of just a really cool, intriguing way of showing your audience, here's a visual of what this kind of conflict, it kind of helps lead to. So I honestly, when the car chase comes up and the cars are going backwards and you see the car flip, but then it unflips and gets in between, and they do the like crazy pass of the football, my brain immediately is like, don't figure that out, just stop. And I don't resent my brain for protecting me, because at this point in the movie, especially the first couple times watching it, my brain was like, what?
It's kind of self-preservation on a level where he's like, I just need to turn certain pieces off.
I'm okay with that. Like, I'm not a dumb guy, but I'm far from like hyper intelligent.
Imagining this movie and writing it down and being a genius filmmaker. Yeah, I'm not at that level.
I'm not there. So I just kind of accept it for what it is and go, it's a
enjoy the
badass car heist, like highway scene, which are always fun to watch in a movie. And this one is just done in a style that will never be replicated again, because think about it. If any movie down the line attempts to do something with like a time traveling car chase fight scene in the middle of the highway, it won't look as cool. It won't be the same effect. And instantly everyone would be like, oh, you're trying to rip off of Tenet. Like, you're trying to rip off of Nolan right now. And you're probably not pulling it off.
Great. Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of cool knowing like this will be the only movie to have this style.
Right.
And I accept that. And try not to figure out the science, because it hurts.
Okay.
It hurts really
well, the car chase is very cool. It's so cool. You get to see it twice, because they at the end of the car chase, they end up at the Freeport.
Is it twice or is it 4 times? Who knows?
They get to the Freeport and then realize that there is another turnstile there. The turnstile, they've recently learned, is a thing that is what they saw in the Oslo airport, that is a device for manipulating
They haven't learned about it completely yet. When they see it again, it's when the car chase goes south. Because you have that crazy save. It's one of the most intense. I can't believe you tried to gloss over this.
I'm so sorry.
It's fun. It's just the way it's shot is so like, oh my god. You always have movies where, like, especially car chases, where it's like, give me your hand, hop over, and they trade cars. It's always cool. It's always fun. This one gets me because both doors are wide open, and they're like, one's traveling backwards, one's forward, and they do this the whole time with the door. And
they like bump each other.
It's so daunting watching it, because you're like, what is this?
Yeah. And she's going backwards in a car that is nobody is driving. It's just like rolling towards an oncoming traffic.
It's just going. It's a crazy save that goes sour, because then you get like an actual shootout-ish. You think like, oh, normal shootout. And then you see people like reverse moving in it, and you're like, oh fucking god.
Yeah, and so they get kidnapped. They get taken to the Freeport,
Mhm.
and the protagonist is on one side of the glass. Andre and Kat are on the other side of the glass, and he's essentially trying to tell him where he ditched the 241
Yeah.
and get information out of him. What you don't realize while it's happening, well, you hear the audio is it's like backwards and then repeated through speakers forwards, like normal, which is interesting. And then, uh, and then at the end of it, he shoots Kat in the stomach, and then walks backwards to the turnstile. And well, another satyr comes out of nowhere, on the protagonist side, grabs him, interrogates him as if he didn't know that he just told him where the 241 was. And then he's like, oh, you already told me? Great. Walks. They both go into the turnstile. It goes around and he disappears, which is crazy because you've only seen dudes come out of them from
Yeah,
nowhere.
you haven't seen like the actual time travel yet.
Right.
But now
And
you
so
have.
you start, have you though? I when I first saw it, I was like, so they can come into it and then come out of it. Is it like a portal? What's happening in there?
True.
And then, but then you do see that the exact next scene is you see him go into it, come out the other side, do everything that he just did in reverse, where he shoots Kat, and then you realize, oh, you shot Kat immediately.
Yeah.
And then you interrogated me, and then you counted back, like forwards instead of backwards, and all this stuff. And you're like, this is so crazy. And then he leaves to find the 241 that he just told him about. And then you see the car chase again in reverse.
Well, during that, like after Satyr leaves again, you meet this whole new military crew that kind of helps you understand, like, oh, this is a huge issue. Like, these guys are special op military.
Yeah.
This is crazy. It's getting bigger. And they know all about it. And he's like, where did he go? Oh, he went to the past. And you're like, that's Kick-Ass with a beard. Oh, my God.
Yeah. When it's, what's his name? Aaron Taylor Johnson or something. Yeah, he's awesome. And he has like a cool accent and all this stuff.
Right. And they give him a quick explanation of like, if you get shot with an inverted bullet, like the radiation and the way that the bullet has gone through you, that's what kills you within days.
Yeah.
And he's like determined to save Kat because, yeah, he's a spy. He's not the usual like womanizing spy or even really suave.
Yeah.
But he's so like, he cares about people, and he's trying to save her because he knows like she just wants to be with her son. And
he's a classic hero archetype.
He is a classic hero, and he's like, I kind of owe it to her because I kind of got her shot. This is my bad.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing about the radiation is that if they go through the turnstile and invert her, then the radiation is less effective because it's going at the same, its entropy is at the same direction as her is, as her is. So if the radiation and her are in the same entropy direction, then she can actually heal as opposed to it killing her.
Yeah,
it takes like a long time, but it's possible.
They said how long did they say?
They said like a week.
A week or something.
It takes her at least a week or something to get through to it, and then like, well, you have to go through this thing. You're going to go back in time for at least a week. How are you ever going to get turned back around? And they're like, well, funny you should ask. There's a turnstile in Oslo about a week ago at the airport, and so we'll just go back there.
Yeah, this is where the movie to me is like, oh yeah, because they've been talking about inversion, time inversion, inverting the entropy of objects around. But now they're flat out going to show you time travel in the
Mhm.
like most dull way, but it's exciting at the same time because
Yeah.
you have
And
no
I
clue what the outside world is doing because
Mhm.
they're stuck in a container.
Right. And I love this version of time travel where it's going at the exact same rate as normal time.
Yeah.
It's not like you're shooting backwards to the past or something like that. It's like, no, we're just going to flip direction. We're going forward. We're going to flip directions and go backwards at the exact same rate, which is interesting. I love the way that the machine that they use is just the most ordinary dull. We just go around in this machine and somehow magically it changes everything about our reality. Um, Primer does kind of a similar thing as a movie about time travel. That's just like you sit in a box and then something happens and you come out and time has changed. It's just awesome. Um, but yeah, it's then now they just need to, after they have gone backwards, and they just need to wait a long time, and then they end up in the past.
I I do feel bad. We kind of skipped a little bit. The second time you're watching the car chase is from the protagonist who knows he's got to go and find out what he did with the 241.
Yeah, and they tell you a lot of interesting things because it's his first time being inverted, and so they're like, you need your own air
Yep.
because, which I don't understand any of this, but I think it's interesting. Normal oxygen cannot pass through the membranes of your lungs, of inverted lungs. Um, and so you need inverted air in order to actually breathe. Um, if you are walking or running forwards, you can do that, but the wind is at your back.
Mhm.
The If you catch on fire, then the fire is actually like sucking heat away instead of heating you up, so it actually will freeze everything. Um, there's so many crazy things that I'm like, how did you sit there and think about all of this
Well, I
stuff
love when
happening?
he's like, "Can I drive a car?" And she's like, "Well, I can't say much for the handling." And you see him drive a car, and the whole time your brain is like, "I don't understand
Yeah. I'm like, it looks hard. I'll
what's
tell you that.
happening."
Well, she's like, yeah, friction is reversed and something else. Uh, yeah. And like gravity is the same, but there's some weird thing about it. Yeah, it's all, everything is all just, you're like, I get it. It's wonky. I will just live in a wonky world,
And
is what
you
you're
get
telling
it
me.
when he's walking out into the world for the inverted timeline for the first time, and he like steps in the puddle, but
Hmm.
without the splash because he's already splashed, so his foot like does that weird
Yeah, like
high step,
splashes and then he steps into it. Yeah.
and then he gets in the car and you see it like,
Hmm.
and he like pauses. All right, I got it. And it's like kind of clunky driving the whole time.
Yeah.
Again, my brain was like, don't, don't.
Yeah. You're like, it's hard. He's telling me that it's
just
hard what he's doing.
just accept, just accept it, and you're like, got it. This is okay. I got it. And then you
Yeah.
get the explosion that is exactly what she said, where it's like, if there's fire, it freezes and it blows up the car, and you see
Hmm.
all the ice form immediately. And I
Hmm.
was like, I like that. I like that.
Yeah. And Neil gives him an interesting tidbit that you shouldn't go out there. You'll cause whatever you're trying to stop, and whatever happened.
Yep.
Um, and that's an interesting like thread that may or may not be true. It's up to you really to decide. But he does end up going out there and giving him the 241 because he had caught it in his car and he was the car in between, and then Sadar sees it and saw the exchange, and that's when he blows it up. Yeah, I think we covered what happened
That's a
there.
car crash.
But so they are traveling backwards in time in this container. It's got like plastic around it so that keeps all the air in.
Mhm.
And then they end up back at the airport
Well,
and
and Neil
they,
spends that time. I love that scene because I feel like that was also full of moments where Nolan is kind of telling the audience, like, this is the scene where
Mhm.
they tell you about paradoxes, and
Yeah,
there's no
grandfather
answer to a
paradox.
paradox, so don't stress about it. Like, I love, it's a paradox. Now get some sleep. Like, just deal with it.
Yeah.
And I love like when he's trying to explain to Kat what's going on. It's so quick, you don't even get an explanation. It's just Neil walks over and goes, "Okay, so let's start with the simple things about physics," and that's all you hear. All I imagine is at one point Kat would have to look at Neil and be like, "Nope, am I gonna live? That's all that I
Right.
care now."
Yeah. The
Like,
priorities.
am I going to
I know you're trying to
permanently be
save the
stuck in
world.
this weird, inverted, but not life? Or am I going to get to
Hmm.
move forward again?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so we get
Um,
to the airport again.
yeah. And so they use the exact same airplane crash as a mechanism to sneak in, even though they are obviously they're running forwards, but everybody else in the world are running backwards. And so I feel like they should notice these people who are running backwards out of the airport. It's such a weird thing. But so they get to the airport, they go in. Luckily, they have their own gas mask, so they don't need to worry about the
Well,
gas,
yeah, they're
the halide
suited up.
gas. Yeah, and so they get in there. They get into the center, and and he has to fight his way in, as opposed, and you realize that, oh shit, you are the guy that came out of the turnstile because you have to fight yourself to get into it
Yeah.
backwards. You have to fight yourself backwards to get into it, and then once you get into it, then you run out and Neil chases
Yeah.
you again. And that whole thing, I watched YouTube clips where they synchronize the first scene and then the second airport scene, and you get to see, like, from both perspectives, who was where at which time,
Right.
how both versions of the fight match up perfectly and beautifully. It's really, really interesting. um, but just to see that and then just have the audience go, oh, I see what's happening here. And realize that that person is not like some mystic figure, but that's actually the
That's
hero,
right.
and it
That's your
in a different
protagonist,
time.
folks.
Yeah, it's just bonkers.
It is bonkers. Well, and they really give you the heavy clue, like he's the guy from the beginning, that first fight scene, because out of nowhere he's like, oh, and his like arm has a hole in it all of a sudden, like the inside of his bicep has a hole, and even Neil
Yeah.
looks at him like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I love all of those little details where they're getting to the airport and he just starts randomly, his arm starts hurting and then it starts bleeding, and then he puts on the jacket and there's a hole in the jacket and you're like, that can't be good, but we don't have time to think about it right now. And then it all connects and you're like, oh, I see, when you got to that point and you got stabbed and now we are going backwards in time from when that happened and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's the same scene in the highway heist where you don't pay attention to it, but when he's in the car in the BMW
The
originally
mirror.
with Neil, he like leans forward and you see like the mirror is broken, and you don't really notice it until the car gets hit and then the mirror gets fixed,
Yep.
and you're like, how long has that been broken for? I
Yeah.
didn't even notice. And that's where I think you start to realize the entropy being reversed thing of like that they I don't know.
Well,
I don't understand entropy, but that thing is now fixed.
right, because at that point they're moving, normal. So to me, it's another, like, it's showing how the more objects which the entropy has been inverted, if
Mm-hmm.
they like contact each other, the effect that it can have and that drastic kind of change. This one was it fixed the mirror, but who's to say, the negative side of that or the reverse of that would be the more these objects are colliding into each other, the more damage it causes. If an inverted object is flying in, they talk about like with humans, if you get shot with an inverted bullet, it's radiation. It's another example of just like, here's how quickly and how bad this could actually mount up. Right now, it's something small, but they gotta stop Sator because he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole second airport scene always is just like, he gets out of the turnstile and runs from Neil, and your brain has to act exactly like the turnstile, where it's like, we're back to normal time now. We're moving forward again. Like, catch up, but don't try to figure out why suddenly there's multiple of these guys in the same timeline. Stop it.
Yeah. And the main thing that you learn is not only as the audience, you realize that was the protagonist the whole time, but you realize that Neil learned that that was the protagonist because he was able to unmask him and then hasn't told him this whole time. So since the airport, he's known that it's him. At least since the airport, he's known potentially the entire time. And I also love when they get out of the airport and they leave. Well, first of all, the protagonist gets out, tells him it's safe to go in, but he's telling him in reverse. He's like, ugh, instead of go. It's amazing. But then once they both get out and they get in the ambulance and they drive away, you see them running in like backwards out as well. Like when they originally ran in, they are now moving in reverse out. They're both in the same place going in different times. And that's this thing, the part where they meet in the middle and then go out, is a thing that my brain wraps around the most, I think, because that's the whole turnstile thing where the protagonist is in the turnstile and then came out both ends at the same time. And then when Sator goes in at the same time and then disappears, that is so fascinating to me because it's like, so he's traveling forwards in time and backwards in time. And then he meets at the turnstile and he's gone because his timeline is linear. So he meets in there and that's that point in time, because in other points in time, he's all the way out here. And so that's how the protagonist can appear in the turnstile, is because he is both traveling out and in at the same time.
Right.
If that makes sense. But that's kind of the structure of the whole movie as well, where all the way up to the highway heist is relatively normal movie. They get to the Freeport at the dock turnstile. The protagonist and Neil and Kat and everybody's turning around to go backwards. That's basically the middle of the movie. It's like an hour and 25 in, and there's like an hour left. And so then they go back all the way to the beginning of the movie from there. So that's like just like a loop that they do.
But we're not done going farther back in the story.
Right. So they got to the airport, they flip back around, start going forwards. Kat's okay. She just has this nasty scar. And then now that they're in the past again, the protagonist connects with Priya, and he's like, what the fuck? You told me that I was chasing plutonium, but I was not chasing plutonium. You wanted me to stop Sator from getting it, but you basically also secretly wanted me to give it to him. And he's like, you need to not do that. She does a really interesting thing where she references Oppenheimer, which is Christopher Nolan's next movie.
I was like,
this summer. But the point of that is that Oppenheimer believed that by creating the atomic bomb, he would start a chain reaction and destroy the universe. And that is setting up the real threat of Tenet, which I did not understand until like the fifth or fourth time I've watched it, which is that not only are they inverting individual objects and sending them backwards in time, reversing their entropy so that they go backwards in time. The risk is that we all, the world, are going forwards in time, and we all perceive that we're all going forwards in time. And we see over the course of the movie that when you reverse one or two or three things, or one or two or three people, there's a conflict there where those things are now going in opposite directions. And so that creates conflict. If you reverse enough things so that most things are going backwards in time, then that becomes the new flow.
Right.
And everybody is now going backwards in time. Well, most people are, and that is the new status quo. That's the new standards. Most things are going backwards in time. And so those previously normal people are now in conflict with you. And so the point of the movie, I think, is that Sador is being recruited by the future to help do this because they want that to happen. And that's the grandfather paradox that they talk about on the boat, is that they want the people in the future, their rivers have dried up, their air is polluted, like everything in the future is terrible. So they want to turn around and go back to healthier, cleaner life and times, even if it means destroying everything in the universe and all that stuff.
Right.
Which they don't know if that will happen or not, but they want to try.
But they're
and
willing
they don't care
to
if it's a
risk
risk.
it.
Yeah. And I was like, that's massive. That's a crazy. There's kind of a potentially good angle. It's kind of like a Thanos level threat where it's like, yes, you might kill everybody on the planet, but you also might save everybody on the planet. So maybe you're not that bad. It's an interesting question to ask.
But then they're doing it from, because they mention it very quickly at one point in the movie where it's like, the danger is if you reverse the entropy of all these objects, exactly everything you just said, right? Create the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But then it would add up to, you reverse the entropy of like all the nuclear warheads. Yeah. And that is what would actually kind of decimate and annihilate all life on Earth, essentially.
Because you see that bullets themselves are more devastating when they're inverted, because they have some inverted radiation.
Yeah.
If you add that to other weapons, it could be even worse.
It could be on a whole new scale that, you wouldn't even be able to actually measure. Yeah, it's crazy, like the consequences, and I'm with you. Like, you get it to a point where you're like, they're trying to like essentially reset, but alongside the protagonist timeline, you're kind of understanding or realizing, like, if they do follow through with this, or if this plan works, it's not a reset, it's just complete annihilation and destruction. It would just be a slower process. Well, Neil tells them it's instant. My brain kind of takes it as it would be like that whole process of the two things when you see it. So one time would move a little bit different for the red team than it would for the blue team. And when they do meld or like actually meet and have that conflict, it would be like the offset, like, and that's where it would all blank out essentially. So I can kind of see the idea, but again, it's like, you're very misguided. Like, the future is. It was kind of like a funny way of Nolan being like, the future's fucked, guys. Fucked.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So they, after that conversation with Priya, they decide to go back even further. They go back to the 14th when the opera siege happens. And because they learned that during that time, Kat was with Sador on the yacht in Vietnam, that she said was a wonderful time in his life. They learned that he has a dead man switch that will transmit the algorithm, which is a thing that we haven't talked about at all to the
Well,
point.
because they don't talk about the algorithm up until about this point.
Yeah, very recently. So you learn that the plutonium is not plutonium. The plutonium, the MacGuffin, the thing that they're chasing, is an algorithm, or several pieces of an algorithm are out there. Sator has collected almost all of them already, except for one, which is the one at the Opera Siege and the one on the truck that they gave to him on accident. So now he has all of them. So they're going to go back in time to the Opera Siege when it's supposed to be there. He has all of the pieces. He is also going back in time to that date because he wants to, one, bury the algorithm so that he knows where it is, and he can transmit a signal out to somebody, everybody potentially, because he's wearing a switch that will basically send an email burst to all these people that, hey, there's this super secret scientific algorithm that you can dig up whenever you want. It's at this location, and nobody will touch it for hundreds of thousands of years or whatever, because it's all radiated and stuff. So you can go there whenever, dig it up, and the world, feel free. And so he intends to end his life because he has inoperable pancreatic cancer. So he is also traveling back in time to plant that there at that date, and also go back to Vietnam where he had a happy moment with Kat. She made him feel loved.
Yeah, because
and with his son.
That's what he wants to have as his final moment.
Right. And so he's able to do that because they say he left the red team version of him that was going forward, left the yacht on the 14th and went to the Opera Siege where the 241 was. The blue version of him is going to go back to that moment and get on the yacht because he won't be there. He will miss himself because he won't be there. And then he'll experience that moment with past Kat, red team Kat, because she won't know that he's a piece of shit who tried to kill her. He thinks that he did kill her. And so they are going to intercept this plan as the spies that they are and send blue team Kat back to meet blue team Sator on the yacht, and then also do a temporal pincer move in this giant battle to steal the algorithm.
Well, yeah, because then it comes back to the conversation that the protagonist had with Sir Michael, where Sir Michael was telling him, we picked up this crazy explosion out here where
installs 12, the city where this guy lived in.
And he the conversation, he just kind of brushes over it, whatever. And now you're like, oh shit, that explosion was the whole actual beginning of this craziness that we've been on the ride.
Yeah.
And you get the whole breakdown, the meeting of here's our plan. We have a red team going forward, and the blue team already received this briefing. They're
the blue team has already gone forward.
Yeah.
They know how the battle goes. They briefed us in the future, and now they are going to go backwards. And
as we are showing up, it should be a kind of very smooth operation. Don't interact with blue team. You just do your thing.
Yeah, so one is going backwards and one's going forwards on the same battlefield. The enemy, the Russians, are kind of doing the same thing. Some are going forward, some are going backwards. Some have inverted munitions, some have normal munitions.
I like that he tells them, they got it all. And the U.S. audience is oh my God, am I going to see some more crazy shit? It just looks cool, but you don't really see anything too new. Or maybe at that point you're desensitized to it and you're if I saw it, cool. And then you see the buildings blow up and you're oh my God.
Yeah. There's I love the backgrounds in the inverted scenes because there's so many little details of things that are of explosions that are being
Yeah,
sucked back into being unexploded yet, or birds flying backwards, or all these different things. Dust. Every detail is the correct direction, which is so
yeah,
interesting, and it sucks you in. It sells you on the premise of the movie, which is I believe they're there, and it's also the practical effects and not being green screen. I think that they the actors give much better performances, and they themselves would say I prefer not acting on green
oh
screen
yeah,
because I can feel it, I can live it, and I can give a better performance because I'm actually in the moment.
yeah. I think you hear that a lot from actors where they're like, it's cool in front of the green screen, but they always make fun of it. Of like, you
Mhm.
just kind of act to this green ball, or they put an
It feels silly.
yeah, it's you're silly, yeah, yeah. And then you see like you hear actors show, like this one that making of. They talk to I think it's the stunt coordinator where he's talking
Mhm.
about when they were trying to like plan and plot the whole final battle scene, and they're like, "This, how are we going to pull this off? This is crazy." And I think it was
Mhm.
a stunt coordinator. He says like, as we're trying to figure out like, are we really about to do this? Like, is this really a thing we're about to try and do? He's like, all
Mhm.
of a sudden you hear the helicopters kick on and go flying, carrying these containers, and he's like, "Oh shit, we're doing it. Here we go."
Yeah. Yeah, so I it's so incredible to see this scene where this one team is flying into a battlefield. They land and see the other team leaving the
Yep.
battlefield because they essentially just went through it. But they're also going backwards. And so they're both kind of going into the battle. One's going backwards, one going forwards. And you don't know yet what they're going to experience or why all those guys are beat up, they're limping, that doesn't look like it went well. You're a little concerned, uh, but the mines like blow up and some like suck back in because they were inverted mines, and there's just so much happening all at
You got
once
a
that it's
jeep
like the
that's
most.
like driving away, but driving towards them. They're all shooting at it, and
Mhm.
you're like, Jesus Christ! There's explosions going on everywhere. You got protagonists on the red team. Oh, we skipped that little detail.
The splinter unit.
Yeah, so during the debriefing, I mean, it's kind of an important moment.
Yeah.
Uh, the protagonist approaches the captain, kick ass.
Mhm.
Um,
Captain Kick-Ass.
Captain kick
his
ass. I'm sorry,
his name is
I'm a fan
Ives.
of that guy. I just yeah, Ives. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And he approaches him and he's like, "I wanted to be on the first wave," and he's like, "Dude, there's no such thing as a first wave in this kind of bat."
Yeah.
Like he's telling him like,
Stop thinking in linear time. It's all at once.
right. And he's like, "We're Splinter Cell because I figure we can manage ourselves."
Mhm.
And I remember when we saw it in the theater. At first, I was like, "Is that the like? Is this a suicide mission then?" And they kind of confirm like
Mhm.
anyone that sees the algorithm, you
Mhm.
cannot leave the battlefield because
Right.
you can't risk it. Uh,
Yeah, that information will then go into another time, and it's just gonna
it's just
cause the
gonna
same
right.
situation.
You're just gonna be on that or that cycle all over again.
Yeah.
And so they like it's crazy. Their whole just the journey trying to get to that mine, that
Yeah.
entrance. It's bonk.
My favorite stunt, I guess it's a stunt basically, is when the protagonist is running, he steps on the rubble.
Oh, and it
The
like throws
rubble
him up.
Yeah, the rubble, it was blown up by blue team or some inverted guy, and so it goes back to being whole again, and it like throws him up into the air because it like he stepped on it and it like goes
Yeah,
back up into the sky. Like it just puts you in like you need to think of the battlefield in a completely different way, and and like when they see all of the debris flying towards them and they're like take cover, and then the explosion happens after, and then and then there's a guy there, and then somebody else blows him up from the other direction. You're like, that guy wasn't there before because somebody else had taken care of him, but now time has brought him back,
back,
and so
but he's
they need to
there.
take care of him.
Yeah,
The battlefield and combat is just so different, and
it's so weird.
it's always been 3-dimensional, but now it's like 6-dimensional.
Right,
It's
you're like,
crazy.
it's a kind of dimension we're not going to try to figure out.
Yeah.
It's like a hall of mirrors, but there's bullets and explosions. Uh,
Yeah. And so, but yeah, they do run down the mine and they trigger a mine. And they run down the hallway and trigger a mine, and it collapses it. So they're kind of stuck in
yeah,
there now, but they still continue their mission. You hear a bunch of honking, and you're like, maybe that's important. And then so they keep going. You're also at the same time following Neil, who's on the blue
mm-hmm.
team. He's going backwards. And you learn he has such an interesting arc where he gets into the battlefield, sees some shit going on, sees that the bad guy plant the mines at the entrance to the cave, um, decides that that is going to be a problem, and he's right. He goes back to the beginning to try to stop the red team so that they know about it. Isn't able to. Finds a turnstile in the middle of the battlefield, in the middle of Stalls 12, which makes sense. It's like Sator's home base. And then flips directions, changes gears halfway through, like he says, and then starts going forward in time, gets into the car, honks at them to stop them. They don't hear it. And so he needs to figure out a way to help them get out of there because now they're stuck.
Right. Well, yeah, because he's like, he doesn't quite understand that they were going into the mine, like that was it for him, but he also can't afford to let them say, well, that's it for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's it for them, but they still need to get the
But they got
algorithm
to get the
out. That's
algorithm out of there. Yeah.
the whole point of the mission, is that it doesn't stay collapsed. And so when Sator dies and transmit the location, it's not there.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And so as all this is happening, Kat is on the boat with Andre Sator, and so he thinks that she is past Kat. He wants to have a sweet moment with her. She does a great acting job of pretending that she loves him.
Can we just pause? So we've already been uncomfortable with Sator, but he does something during the scene where she's like trying to be past Kat and kind of be like seductive, like I want to be loving to you.
Yeah.
The way he like grips the back of her head.
She's having like a sweet moment being nice to him, and he like you think he's like going to gently caress her face and be nice, but he fully grabs the back of her head like further than normal.
He doesn't do like the scene doesn't do anything past that, but just that action, the way he holds the back of her head is so like you.
It's just a reminder of he is not being sweet. He is not a sweet man. He's a bad guy.
He's a very evil human being. This is not good.
Yeah.
Not good. And I remember sitting and hearing Chrissy, Chrissy was right next to me when the three of us saw it. And I remember her and I were both like, ooh.
Yeah, it's so subtle, but very gross and effective. And same with like when he takes the call or makes the call to have his son Max brought back to the boat. She said that the nanny was with him, and he's like, "Can you bring my son back?" And then he just like makes a look like they told him some information, and you're like, what did they tell her? And then he brings it up to her. He's like, "They said that they thought you were on shore with them," and she kind of plays it off in a fun way that I guess he buys. But yeah, their whole interaction is so interesting because she's trying to buy time so that they can get the algorithm out, and he's planning to end his life. My theory, he shows the cyanide capsule and he's like, "I got this from the CIA. This is like how I'm going to end it all. And she's like, well, don't do it yet. We have like the sunset stuff. But we know as the audience that at least the CIA capsules that the protagonist got were fake, because he took one, and then when he got picked up, he's like, the cyanide capsules are fake, and he's like, well, yeah. The CIA guy says, yeah. And so my thought is potentially it wouldn't have actually killed him. And I'm not saying all of them are fake, but that one is very
It
specifically
looks
the exact
identical to the
same.
one that the
Yeah.
protagonist takes. I was thinking about that too, because I was like, well, does it just induce the coma? And maybe that's like another way that Sator is planning on like time traveling, because he can just go in the coma or whatnot, because
I've never considered this.
he's been like monitoring his heart rate, right? So
Yeah.
if the heart rate drops low enough, which the body, I guess, might assume it's like dying or whatnot, being put into that kind of coma to whatever. I actually think his dead man trigger doesn't rely on just like actual flatline. I think it might just rely on like the sudden drop in the heart rate.
That's possible.
But I've thought about that too, especially this last week, because he holds it up and he's looking at it, and I was like, it's fake. It's a fake. It's fake.
Yeah.
So
it's so exactly the same and not like any other capsule you've ever seen.
But
and so that's why it like made me think of
I
that.
also wonder if it was also put in to be another paradox or another one of Nolan's little kind of winks at the audience to make you or us, like we are now, debate what if he had just taken it? We know it's fake.
Yeah.
Would anything have happened? Would he die? Would he just be in the coma where like this agency could take him and do whatever they want? If that happened, would it be the agency's fault for turning Sator into who he would turn into in the future? Or
that's an interesting element as well, which I never considered. But he's not the most selfish villain. If I was him and I had inoperable pancreatic cancer, I would just go back into the past and live all over again. Like you're I guess maybe it doesn't work like that, because you're the same age, you're just but your entropy is reversed. So you would be not decaying, you would not be aging, you would be de-aging.
Right. You'd be Benjamin Buttoning it.
Yeah, they've only gone back a couple of weeks. What if Benjamin Button is actually like
inverted
prequel of this?
Oh.
Yeah, he is the first test subject of inversion.
We really went off the rails here.
So they're just buying time on the yacht. She's buying time on the yacht. He's trying to kill himself, and that's the whole tension there. While they're doing that, the whole battle is happening. The protagonist and Ives have gotten down to the bottom, and there's a locked gate there, and they can't get through. There's a dead dude on the ground. They're trying to look for grenades. They find a red thread lanyard thing pop out of his backpack, and you're like, oh, that's the guy from the beginning.
Right, you're like, his life. Came back. This dude's back. But like, tough break.
Yeah, poor guy. He's dead on the ground. That sucks. And then Sator has this huge monologue where he calls them. He knows what they're doing. He knows that he's trying to have his Bond villain moment of a "you'll never succeed" and "you'll never get this" kind of a thing. And there's a lot of interesting things there where, like I mentioned, he says to the protagonist that you are a fanatic. You don't have any information other than your belief of what they've told you is true. It may not be true. And then the protagonist says, you're a fanatic. You're trying to end the world.
Right? Like
right back at you, bud. but they seem like there's no way for them to get in. And then as time starts counting down, he tells them to shoot the protagonist. He tells the henchman dude to shoot the protagonist, and so he does. And then you see the dude on the floor stand up. The bullet passes through him so that he becomes alive again.
Right.
Meaning that he had taken the bullet going into the past. He's inverted. So he comes back to life, unlocks the door, and then lets them in, and they have a whole scuffle over that thing, which is crazy. They do end up pulling it out. Neil throws down a rope and pulls him out at the last second. It's so exciting. I love every second
awesome.
of it.
They even get caught in like as the ground drops for that second like shockwave, and he's watching it like, oh shit, and then he sees him come up and he's like, yeah. He doesn't drive very far away, which I've always been like, just keep going, man.
Yeah, you don't really know how reliable these caves are. Yeah, it's so like tense how close to the end he waits. He waits till like 3 seconds because there's no way for them to tell him, yeah, we got it hooked up, take off. He just waits until there's like 3 seconds left. He's like, fuck it, and just like goes and pulls him up. They're all happy they succeeded. It's great. And then Ives kind of turns on him for a second.
Well, yeah. And this whole time, when do they cut back to the yacht, though?
They cut back to the yacht before that because she can't keep up any longer.
Yeah, she's done with this shit.
Yeah, and she can't let him think that he's won. She has to let them know that they've won.
Yeah.
And he'd break the hold he has over her, basically, which is very cathartic and enjoyable to see.
When she shoots him in the chest, you're like, oh shit, you can't kill him yet, because you're like,
yeah,
don't let him die.
Mm-hmm.
Because she doesn't know if they've gotten the algorithm up. The editing on this is like so intense because as they're having the fight in the mine and trying to get, the algorithm out of there, is when she starts like, she points the gun at Sator. You're like,
yeah,
fucking goddamn it.
Yeah, and she keeps looking at the boat with the guy with the signal.
Well, she's waiting for the signal, and it's just not coming.
He's on the radio. They're getting a call, and he's like, "Oh, this is it. They're going to say that they got it." And they're like, "Just hang on,
hold on,
hold. We definitely don't have it yet." And he's like, "Well, god damn it, stop calling me."
So she shoots Sator, and then like shoves him off of the boat. And this is the only scene of actual extreme violence that we get in this whole movie, and it is
a good one.
Satisfying.
Yeah. You're like, fuck that guy.
The sound of I don't even know, the doink or whatever the sound it makes when he hits the rail is like gross, but happy at the same time.
Yeah, it's what you want.
And everyone's like, she went early. And that's when like the bomb goes off and he's like, fuck it. And he guns it and you see him get pulled up and you're, oh. And then Ives turns on him.
Yeah, he grabs it and pulls out his gun and you're like, oh no, it's not over the conflict or whatever. And then, but he ends up being super cool. He's like, okay, guys, you know what? Let's just take it all apart. We'll each take it to re-hide it.
Yep.
We'll hide it again. Try harder, I guess, to hide it in different places and different times. And that's the point of the mission, or potentially what got them here.
Right. Well, he tells them like, when you hide it, like hide it well, but then you have to kill yourself after you hide it. So that there's no history behind it. And he tells them like, if I see you guys at any point, like I'm just going to kill you. And I love the line where Neil laughs and he's like, but you're not going to try and look very hard for us. And he says, no, I will. I like that line because it's like, ensuring, and I believe Ives would be the guy to pull the trigger.
Definitely.
Which is also a flaw in Ives' plan, because that means he cannot follow through with killing himself after he hides his pieces.
It's true. Yeah, that's true. But he probably is more confident in himself that if he got caught, that he would not be interrogated and break or whatever.
Right. He would, because he strikes you as the kind of character that would, he'll pull the trigger. It's just going to be that quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Ives is walking away like, all right, this is our plan. And protagonist and Neil are left together. And Neil is like, he's the best character.
He is. Neil is the hero of the story, even though the protagonist is the protagonist. Neil is truly the hero because he like keeps dropping hints. He's like, "Hey, Ives, do you know anybody who could have gotten that door open any faster?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "But you weren't there, so I guess that guy got it open faster." And then, but you learn that guy was Neil, because Neil walks away. He
throws the backpack on, and you see the little red lanyard tassel thing, and the protagonist is trying to warn him, which is a common thing in like a time travel story where someone learns like, oh, your fate is not like good. And they're like, well, Neil chums it up to like, hey man, what's happened. Like, we're meeting, how does he put it? You met me at the end of my journey with you, but at the start of your journey with me. And he's like, we get into some fun. You're going to love it. And you're like, no.
Yeah. Because he never told, Neil never told the protagonist who recruited him. And so he tells him, you recruited me in the future. And then you basically sent me back to help you in the past.
Yeah.
Neil himself is doing a temporal pincer the entire movie to the beginning, where he saves him at the opera house. He meets him in Mumbai. He helps him through the whole thing, but he has known him for years at this point and not let him know that. And so they have a long friendship that Neil has experienced, but the protagonist has not. Neil is at the end of his journey because he has to now, he switched streams. He's now in the future as Red Team. He needs to go back as Blue Team again, go back into the mine, into the cave, unlock the door, and then get shot. So that when Red Team protagonist comes through, he will get shot and then open the door and save the world.
Right.
And so the thing that this movie doesn't do, which is slightly annoying and slightly, probably hugely smart, is that it doesn't dwell on parallel universes. Where if you do something in one universe, it creates a separate branch time stream, where, because they talk about, you can go forward as the Blue Team, for example, in the battle at the end. They go forward, they experience the battle, they know everything that happens, they tell Red Team what happened. Red Team then goes forward while Blue Team's coming backwards. That whole thing where they've already gone forward, somebody has to be there and know that and get that information and bring it back. Like, if you go forward once and then come back, you're telling the people at the beginning, but then you have to go do it again. It's like this whole circular thing where you have to have done it. You have to have done it once. And they don't really dwell on who did that, how did that go, how did you know how it went, and does telling us how it went change anything, and does that create a separate thing where it doesn't go that way?
I think Nolan probably purposely avoided doing that, probably for a couple of reasons. One, because you don't want to follow the exact formula that we were all given by Back to the Future.
Yeah.
But I think he was also just trying to concentrate on like kind of reminding people it's supposed to just at its heart be an exciting action spy thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a paradox.
it's a paradox. He's,
It's a chicken and egg problem.
You just let it lie, and we're not going to worry
Mm-hmm.
about it. Plus, can you imagine the pacing? It probably would have fucked the whole thing up if, like, right when you're
totally.
getting into the exciting final battle, they're like, pause. So, when we went in, this happened, and then this happened. Watch out for this moment right here.
Yeah.
I think Nolan probably was just like, my time travel doesn't need parallel universes and extra branches like Back to the Future and Avengers Endgame. Like, we'll just have timelines that are going like this constantly.
Yeah. And I think it makes for a more complete story where it's kind of encapsulated and you're able to follow these people as they go forward and backward and experience what they experience. There, if you start thinking too much about all of the other outside stuff, it gets super messy.
It gets super messy, and I think it detracts from what he's trying to get across and the fun of the story. It's such a bummer to me. I've been bummed every time I finish Tenet this week, watching Neil telling him goodbye, and then I love the nod to Casablanca. It's the start of a beautiful friendship. Well, it's the end of mine, but
I do too.
But I love how he wraps up the protagonist's story, or the movie itself, really, because then we forgot to mention right before the protagonist like actually goes back, he hands Kat a phone, and he tells her at any given moment you feel threatened or uncomfortable, use this phone, call this number. All you have to say is date, time, and place. And she's like,
I was thinking about that because she just says where she is and 3:00, and I was like, that's not really helpful. But then I was like, well, if she's leaving a voicemail, it'll say the date and the time that she left.
Info there. And
it's really just like where you are at that moment that he needs to, and then he already has what the moment is information.
And I love how she sees the car and is instantly like, you see her starting to pull the phone out, and then you cut to Priya in the car. And to me, I'm like, oh yeah, this bitch.
I hope she gets hers.
Right. But it's so short-lived, and Nolan does this a lot throughout the movie Tenet, where like there's something so quick in the back that you don't notice, but it's on camera. They do it when they first meet Priya, when they bungee jump into the building, or when they're leaving it. You see Neil like come over with the rope, and he like jumps down and then dives. But they don't point it out, which I love. And in this one,
it's just like a hint at what's coming.
Yeah, and in this one, you see it's a close-up of Priya. You see the protagonist hop in the back and immediately just pull the trigger and kill her driver. And then she's like, what are you doing here?
I love that you know exactly what happened, but you don't really see him shoot the driver. You don't see him shoot her. You just see a close-up on him. And you're absolutely right. It's the most clean, violence-wise movie.
It's crazy how he does it. And I love that the protagonist tells her, like, we've all been working for me. Like, even I have been. Like, this has been my whole thing.
Well, she tries to lie to him. She's like, you're a protagonist, not the protagonist. He's like, the fuck I'm not.
Like,
and then,
bitch.
He's like, I am the protagonist. And, I recruited me from the future to save the world, and I did, and now I'm just traveling through time saving this one chick.
I can only imagine when Nolan was finishing up his script. First off, I love the voiceover from Neil just talking about like the most dangerous bomb and what could have been. We're just here to save the world from what might happen.
Yeah.
But
And then nobody appreciates all of those
yeah,
things that
like
they didn't
no
know were
one knows
threats.
about the bomb that didn't go off.
Yeah.
Um, but I love the protagonist line of the mission accomplished, because I can only imagine Christopher Nolan after writing this giant fucking crazy script that is
Typing
mission
mission
accomplished,
accomplished.
and knowing
And he's
that
like,
he's such a huge spy genre fan and just like
yeah.
action movie fan in general, I can
Mhm.
only imagine the giant fucking grin on his face as he typed that.
Imagine he sits back in he's got like a Winston Churchill British chair, and he's just like, damn, I'm good.
Damn, that's awesome. And you can only imagine like the producers at Warner Brothers, or script supervisors or whatever, were probably like, now Chris, any way we can rewrite Mission Accomplished, because it's kind of cheesy. Nope.
It's like, that is my favorite part of the movie. You're not taking it
I
away.
bet it is his favorite
I bet
line
it
in the
is.
whole movie. I would bet money on that.
Well, you can't have a good Bond movie without a little cheese.
You have to have some cheese, and the movie is
Yeah,
not cheesy until that moment, but it works because
it
it's
does.
so much fun, because it really reminds you all over again it
Mhm.
was a spy thriller. It's a
Right.
spy movie.
Mhm.
Just have fun with it. You had an eccentric villain who met a pretty brutal demise. You've got the
Mhm.
good guy who's just trying to save the world, because every spy thriller is about saving the entire world. It's always a
Right.
global thing, which is
Yeah.
awesome and hilarious at the same time. I love
Mhm.
Tenet, dude. I fucking love this movie.
I love it, and I love it more and more as I understand all of the little details and the hints and things and the pieces that I missed that set it up. I'm like, oh, that makes actually a lot more
Yeah,
sense now, and
the attention
it's
to
so
detail
good.
to it is incredible. Just I find the story fun and
Hmm.
engaging and captivating, and I genuinely don't understand it when people have told me like they don't get it.
Hmm.
Did you watch it on mute and with your eyes closed? I just don't
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. I think you don't have to understand all of it, and I certainly don't understand all of it. But I think what you feel is all that really
Yeah.
matters. And so he shows you enough that you everything he tells you feels true and uh, feels interesting, that you understand where it's trying to take you,
Mhm.
and if you're willing to just go along for the ride, it's a very enjoyable
It's a
ride.
very enjoyable ride. And I said it at the beginning. I think I'm always going to preach this about this movie in particular.
Hmm.
I think this movie deserves so much respect, because just the approach and execution that Nolan and the entire team went after in making the movie,
Hmm.
just on the filmmaking standpoint alone, I think this might be the greatest film just on that aspect alone. Like you said at the
Yeah.
beginning, is it the perfect movie? No. But I don't think it ever tries to be a perfect movie. And that's
Right.
kind of something I really respect about Nolan, and it's ironic because being such a fan of his and what he's known for putting on the screen, he's called a genius. I call him a genius. Fans like us call most of his movies like this is pretty much the perfect mill. I mean, The Dark Knight is considered like as close
Yeah.
to perfection as you get when it comes to making a movie. But his movies are like they're so engaging and they're so fun,
Hmm.
but they're not. He doesn't aim ever to make the perfect movie. He literally just picks a subject and he goes, "That might be cool," and he
Hmm.
does it.
Right. And it's I love his passion for film, and it's from a purely audience appreciation and
Yeah,
entertainment standpoint. It's like, I just want to make movies that people enjoy watching, that are fun, that are interesting, and that blows some minds along the
Right.
way.
He's like, I just want to. It's like he's trying to remind modern audiences what filmmaking and like the magic of movies actually looks like and
Yeah.
actually feels like. That you don't
Yeah.
have to
And
rely
so,
on a fancy digital gimmick, but you can actually do the way they used like old school film tricks on Tenet, like
yeah,
just the editing styles of miniatures. They even did the fucking wraparound film with a car where
yeah.
the background is on that reel.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, like he went old school tricks, and that was cool watching and listening to like the production teams and the set designers talking about we made all of it. This isn't we actually went to these locations. We actually put the actors in these positions, and none of this was fake.
Yeah.
That's and just see their excitement about that. I mean, that's cool.
It is
That's
cool.
cool.
And it's creates timeless movies at the same
It really
time
does.
that you'll be able to watch these 100 years from now and they won't look worse. They will look just as good.
Right. And I think the quality of them is what is really going to have that longevity because, you know, the flashy, glitzy films, I think a lot of people have already kind of started already burning out on them or forgetting about them entirely. But
Yeah.
you mention, you know, Memento or, and people are like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
God damn. I fucking love Tenet. I love Chris Nolan. It's unreal what this guy accomplishes. And Tenet is just, to me, it's a masterclass. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I completely agree. So I hope that helped explain anything, something. I'm still trying to figure out how to describe how the two cars are going.
I know you are. I know you are.
This one was here, and then this one was here, and it had to be
They're
whatever.
going this way, but then, you know, it's like
you get it.
It's twitchy. It like does this maneuver.
So if you don't understand, reach out on Instagram. We're happy to discuss it. Or if you have theories, I know we've raised a couple here. If there's anything that you're like, I thought about it, and what happens if this happened or anything like that, I want to hear all about that stuff. So reach out on Instagram or whatever. And yeah.
I think that's it.
What are we doing next time, Dustin?
I don't know, Jake, because the last time I had it in my calendar, we were all sorts of mixed up.
Yeah, I know.
Are we doing crushes?
I think we're doing crushes.
Are we doing
That's what
crushes?
I have as well. We're doing top 10 movie crushes. I have it as movie crushes. You could put in some TV crushes if you want. But I personally, I thought I was doing movie crushes.
I thought we were doing movie crushes too.
Cool. I'm just throwing it out there. If you have any TV crushes from back in the day or current,
now,
I'm fine with that.
Now, I guess this could all be off air, but off air, we're not radio. Oh my God.
It's live. We're doing live.
We're doing it live. Are we doing characters or like actresses?
Characters.
No.
Okay. Characters, although the actress obviously plays a part. Obviously plays a part in it.
It's late, folks. Don't blame us.
Probably a big part in it.
Yeah.
Probably, never mind. I was going to say a couple big parts in it. But in all wholesomeness, we were going to do the top 10 movie crushes that we have had probably since childhood.
Should be fun. It'll be a silly adolescent style episode of TV.
At least one of mine is an anthropomorphic animal, so take that for what it is. I'm not a furry, don't worry. That rhymed. That's fun.
I'm a little worried. We got some new merch showing up, so check that shit out soon.
Yes, a couple of people have asked about hats, and we realized we didn't have hats, so now we do.
Yeah, so watch for those, and we will see you guys next time.
All right, thanks everybody for sticking with us.
Bye, everyone. Go watch Tenet. It's awesome.